Story unfolds in the dungeon of Tyros. The deeper, the farther. Deeper they go, the more everything drags them in. To the darkness, a battle fueled by despair is already. Any moment now very close. In the dungeon, several people met the Lord of the Restless, the Demon Lick. Dungeon, one of them was sure, the undead are the strongest type. About the monster, he called his minions, and the people in unison loudly said that it continuously called monsters one after another, and no end is in sight for them. What should they do? They called the princess, and she said, if they want this, let them defeat it, let their onslaught continue. One of the team members thought that with her black curly hair which waves in rhythm. The wind pushes her further. She continues to fight with despair as if this is her last battle. Her name is Yuika. Black Princess, Dungeon Digest, a specialized class that helps carry the traveler's equipment and at the same time allows their guide to reach the paths by which the dungeons were explored and conquered 20 days before this. Or in the Tyros dungeon, at the depth of the 20th floor. A team of people desperately fought against huge golems rumbled and decisively declared that they could not waste this chance. There's still time, they need to act together. They ran away, and the tanks, what are they doing? Mage rushed to attack one of these monsters. He cast the spell Lightning Strike and defeated the monster. Later, near the underground oasis, they finally stopped to rest. And one of them loudly swore about what was happening. The mage drank a mana potion and someone asked how much exactly. How much of that potion has he already drunk? It's a waste of mana. He turned around. He turned to him and said simply, I can't do anything about it, this vanguard is useless. The swordsman got angry and loudly blurted out, what are you saying? He raised his stick, smiled and asked. He was asked if he forgot what just happened, and instantly a quarrel broke out between them again. They got into new arguments again when some guy came up and asked, are you fighting again? As long as no one pulls them apart, it's still okay. So what is that it? The team member said tiredly, if he only wants to separate them, let him try. He was too exhausted to get involved. The dude with the huge backpack on the side gave up, decided there was nothing to be done anymore. Dungeon Sherpa, Ro came up and whispered that the two of them needed to listen, shouting like that is dangerous, monsters could have heard. They turned to him and shouted loudly that he could not possibly remember how he saw him during the fight, and where, for heaven's sake, could that damned Sherpa have been at all, he said with a smile. Could it be that he went to gather some valuable herbs? The swordsman grumbled discontentedly. Isn't it cool to be a Sherpa? He doesn't have to fight monsters, it's an easy way to make money. The mage, grinning boldly, sharply cut in that it's their problem if they got hurt, so he should shut up. The protagonist replied, if he runs out of potions, he can give you some. He pulled out several elixirs and said that none of them were diluted with water, so they were all first class. Their words confused them and they decided, this is a healing elixir. It will heal your wounds. This is a restorative potion, the best choice to regain strength after fatigue. He even has a strength potion. The mage glanced, barely smiling, but it's not free. Really? He handed them the price list. They shuddered with surprise, stared at the numbers and loudly exclaimed, prices twice as high as market rates. The swordsman grabbed him by the collar and barked, are you mocking us, fraud? On the contrary, he calmed them down calmly, asked them to pull themselves together and promised to inform them. For a dungeon, this is just pennies. Even if they decide to return to the surface now, they won't escape the clashes with monsters. Moreover, if that happens, their equipment will be seriously damaged and they will pay even more. If they buy this from him, they will save both time and money. One of the party members thought that they even had enough endurance to get to the surface. The swordsman with a dissatisfied face loudly asked, is this already his victory or will they all perish? MC apologized and said that the price cannot be negotiated. But such an item simply doesn't appear on the market. It is for high-level adventurers. The party members called the leader and decisively stated that they need to buy exactly this because they are high-level adventurers. Let them use high-level items. He needs to stop behaving like a barbarian. It's not worth it at all. He finally fell silent, let him go, and said that this time he would let it slide, but he would never hire him again. O smiled and said he was grateful for their cooperation. Later he thought about the city of Tyros, about this city. The city grew immediately after a dungeon was found here. This is a city of adventure. Came to the Sherpa Guild, a woman was already sitting in the hall. She leaned over the counter and greeted him. He called her an old witch and declared that he was already home. Home, she blossomed with a smile and asked how everything went with their unruly gang. He froze for a moment in thought and replied that, as she said, they were all seasoned travelers. They really were rebellious, that's why they were called that, but regarding strength, strangely, they remained quite balanced. He felt that they could hold out there for a long time, but they said they would no longer hire him. She looked at him slightly displeased and said that he was already the third. It became clear if he failed, looking for others would be pointless. He did not stop and added that he would submit the report tomorrow. He needed to pick up his younger sister. Sister, she exclaimed and asked if he had left her with relatives again. Everything came to him with great difficulty. After that, he turned onto another street, saw Mari, and called her by name. Smiling, she rushed to him and hugged him tightly. Hugging his leg, she said, "Welcome back," and shuddered at the very moment the door opened. That man from there called him and said that he finally returned. Protagonist Miro and said that he sincerely thanked her for always taking care of his sister, gave her money, and promised to inform her if he needed her help again. She slammed the door and shouted that she didn't know whether she was ashamed or whatever feeling it was, but he completely ignored it, patted her on the head and said it was time to go home. By the way, maybe they should pack lunch for the road. For lunch and off to a picnic in the forest, she took his hand and asked if they would gather gauzy fruits. He agreed and replied that it was just harvest season. They could gather some and they made a lot of jam. She laughed, joy shining on her face, and said they hadn't been on a picnic for so long. He looked at creak 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 creak. He looked at her with a smile and thought that a Sherpa never fights monsters, but can you really guess what will happen in a dungeon? A dungeon is a survival game where danger lurks around every corner, and there's always a chance he won't return. The little sister, she is only 4 years old, understands all this. They reached home and he promised there would be stew for dinner. She was glowing with joy and said that he must allow her to help. The next day he came to the Sherpa Guild, greeted in the morning, and solemnly announced that he had brought a report on the dive. He was blown away. A man was standing by the door and calmly stated he was waiting specifically for him, but this was his favorite. An outstanding student was waiting for him. Let him tell about the wonderful job he had found. MC closed the door right in front of him and, smiling slyly, said that when he smiles and talks like that, it usually means he wants to drag him into some complicated work. He was trembling with nerves and he said that he had already asked him for many things, but this time it was different. They have an important person from the royal capital. He finally opened the door and looked at him suspiciously. And the man said, this time the employer was a member of a famous group that came from the royal capital. In the hall, he declared that this is Twilight Sword. He looked at her, eyes full of surprise, and asked again, what is this? This is exactly what the rumors in the guild are about, right? Receiving a positive answer, he thought, that's right, as everyone knows. They cleared many dungeons, and the most famous among them are those featured in the monthly list of adventurer groups. They are considered the hardest not by numbers, but by real strength. They always hold the top places. They are also called the heroes of the East. Rumors buzz that their leader is a beautiful girl with black hair, who is not even 22 yet, as he understands this is exactly their order. She introduced herself and said she wants to clear the Tyro's dungeon. Will he help her achieve this? He thought, today they learned that this dungeon extends down to 47 floors, and that's the maximum. The last floor they could possibly reach is the 53rd. To clear the entire dungeon, they will have to reach it and clear it completely. Exactly so. All this happened because of the guild leader Gunji and the former guild leader Gimu. He demanded only one thing from him: to accompany the travelers, dive into the deepest, still undiscovered corners of the dungeon. This meeting gave rise to an amazing adventure. They still did not suspect what lure really hid. He crept deeper and deeper down to the very bottom of the dungeon, where true darkness enveloped him. Leading the hero's squad to the farthest depths of the dungeon, such a mission was a great honor for the dungeon itself. Sherpa Ro raised his hand, smiled, thanked her for the offer, and then said he was scared and therefore had to refuse. Diving into unexplored parts of the dungeon, that would take a lot of time, wouldn't it? He can't disappear for so long. Gima laughed and said that maybe she could teach his sister to ride Sherpa while he was gone. He, outraged, loudly declared that he was not joking. She called him Little One and asked, is he going to take care of his sister right? That's why he eventually became Sherpa, because in this city it was really a profitable business. He should be happy because this time the reward was even greater, one he wouldn't earn even in a year now. So it turns out he had no objections, right? He took the diving plan from her, read it, and pondered, if he gets this reward, Mari will still be able to go to school, but until the day comes for the long dive, until they completely clear the dungeon. So they can only arrange 3 short-term dives. That's enough for him to agree to the offer. And he also said that there is no other group visible on the list except theirs. Yuika said that Twilight Sword is a group that operates on its own, while regular groups usually go to. It was necessary to move into unknown parts of the dungeon. Other groups were too slow, and this only increased the risk of falling into a monster ambush. However, Twilight Sword is a group of 4, and they have already cleared similar dungeons more than once. Twilight Sword is a team strong enough to simultaneously challenge several large leagues. That's how they have always operated. How they acted and what they are going to do next. The protagonist said he would familiarize himself briefly. He came up with a theory about himself from the diving plan, introduced himself, and continued. He extended his hand and, smiling, said that he accepted their request. West extended her hand in response and, sincerely smiling, said, "Then you can just call me by my name." He said he couldn't wait to work with her. West firmly shook his hand and replied with a friendly smile that F. Their moods coincided. He was surprised by her smile. He did not expect it at all, and she, on the other hand, said that she would gladly set off right now. She needed to replenish her supplies of tools and potions. When he asked if he could recommend a good shop, he agreed, but she wanted to go where travelers like to visit and said that in these circles they are well known. They would not even come close to such places, so much so that she cannot even breathe properly. Today she wants to avoid all of this. He said that popularity is pure pain. He thought being famous is not easy at all. He clarified, equipment preparation is paid separately. Doesn't matter, she replied, she will just leave everything to him. After that, they walked through the city streets and bought various necessary things. He said that finally they gathered everything they needed. She thanked him. He, as if casually, asked if she minded having dinner together and added that his younger sister would come. Yuka did not object and agreed. Before that, later they came to his house. Marie met them, introduced herself, and said she was 4 years old. She was about years old. She called him by name and asked if that was his dog. Although there had been almost 20 years of harmony between them before, he simply said that this was his sister. The whole difference is that she could simply address her by name. She sat opposite, smiled warmly, gave her name, and said she would work together with her brother. He nodded and firmly confirmed they would dive together, starting from tomorrow. After that, they headed to the restaurant. The waiter placed dishes in front of them and sincerely thanked them for waiting. Mari said with a smile that it would taste better if eaten like this and looked at her. He approached her and sincerely thanked her for the advice. MC looked at them and thought he hadn't seen her like that for a long time. When he decided to take her to dinner at a restaurant, he had no idea they would get along so easily and well. The waiter placed ale in front of him and Yoika, interested, asked, "Is this beer?" He nodded and said it went perfectly with the local food. "To drink this," she said shyly, "even when I turned 16 and was allowed to drink, I never tried alcohol." Still in the hall, he offered her juice, and as soon as it was brought, she suddenly began tasting her juice. She said contentedly that she really enjoyed this juice, and he was already about to say something about it. But she drank it in one gulp, raised her hand, and asked for a mug of ale. Then she started drinking alcohol. And added she is already 20, of course she could drink beer. He could not believe that she drank a whole mug in one gulp, but immediately. As soon as it happened, she immediately felt worse. In the morning, she slowly woke up in bed and wondered if it was already morning. From here it was unclear. It seemed this was not her room at all. She had a pain knocked in her head, and suddenly the memory of that evening surfaced when she had dinner with him and his younger sister. Eureka suddenly remembered yesterday how she drank a mug of ale. She hugged Marie and whispered, "You are so sweet." She sat her on her lap, gently stroked her head, and whispered that Marie was like an angel. Now she needed to call her sister again. Because of this, she felt very uncomfortable. He grabbed her by the head and thought, what has she done? What is this bitter drink? And this knocked all reason out of her. She was so sweet. So she tried to be a good sister. She heard their voices and instantly saw him. Caught sight of their things and froze. Was she in their house? She had put on shoes. He was already about to leave the room and thought, in any case, he should sincerely apologize for all the inconveniences. She left the room, fussed around, and washed the dishes. Pay attention to her. "Hello," he said. Mari approached and bowed. Again he greeted her. Yueka greeted her with a little blushing, and thinking that she was still sweet, she sat down in front of her. He said that yesterday she apologized for her behavior. Yesterday, it seemed that every move she made only bothered her more. He set the plates with food on the table and said that everything was fine. She would have run away as soon as she felt even the slightest discomfort. She sat like this. She so meekly settled on her lap simply because she really liked her. They are supposed to have breakfast all together, she with. A bit confused, she replied that she could not accept this offer. But when Marie proposed it, her face instantly lit up. She gladly agreed. When they finished eating, she said she needed to go and pick up their equipment from the Adventurers Guild. It would be difficult. It was hard for her to navigate alone, so she asked him to go with her, and they left the house. He waved to them and wished them a safe journey. Soon they reached the guild. failure where the girl loudly asked in panic whether she need to drink, have a beer, and just spend this night. That evening at his home, it seemed as if nothing had happened. She went shopping with him and returned. Only the next morning, there were no attacks there, right? Said Yuika with a confused expression that there really are no monsters in the city. She loudly exclaimed in an anxious tone that this was not what she meant at all, and the protagonist with a slightly embarrassed expression replied that he just let her rest at his home. The girl did not manage anything else, she just fainted in the store. Earl sharply called him a predator, asked him to shut up, and announced that he was fired. He politely introduced himself and thought that she probably misunderstood something. She stood between them with an irritated face, growled angrily, and called Bari, ordering her to calm down. They hired that Sherpa, and she seemed to him as if she had a sister complex. A man with a serious face ran up to him quickly, apologized, and said that when she became the Black Princess, everything in her seemed to turn upside down. Her reactions changed sharply, and she began to behave completely differently. He is confused about everything. His name is Nuku. He is a shortstop. MC looked at him with a smile and warmly said that he was glad to meet him. Suddenly a mage flew up to him. With his staff he snatched his backpack, laughed loudly, and declared that he would be a wonderful anchor. He is Mazakin, a sage who both protects and attacks with magic. He froze with surprise upon hearing his name and asked, "Is this the legendary traveler who was?" For 3 different feats he was called a hero, but he just laughed, and Bari asked with an indignant look, "Did he just call him legendary? But he is just an old man who retired and came back." Again, Nuku said, by the way, that this man is her father. He was also over 60 and both. He boasted that he stood at the highest level among all, and Ru was stunned with surprise. The man looked so young, and Ruika slowly approached him. He told her directly that she and Barry are warriors of light. She instantly turned to Ruika and loudly blurted out, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want to take him with you?" She said calmly, "We'll sort out all these details in the dungeon." She was allowed to address the princess and ask her to wait, and then they asked to reconsider the decision. After some time, they went down to the dungeon. Reached the stairs, the protagonist said this is a shortcut, only for travelers of high level and above. This will lead them to the 14th floor. It's slippery here, let them be careful. And as they were descending, he noted that their goal for today's journey is to reach the 47th floor. After the 3rd dive, they will finally be able to reach the dungeon core. Eureka explained, the dungeon core is what spawns monsters in the dungeon. This will give them a ton of incredible experience. Clearing the Tyro's dungeon will also raise their level a bit. She called and said she believes he knows a bypass to the next. Stozes, on which floor is it? On the 19th, he replied. They need to remember, on the way they will encounter a bunch of different monsters and it will all start immediately. Ahead they will face monsters that hunt in packs. He listed them and emphatically stressed that silver plates will be the rarest among all. She smiled and said that she understood him, and that was enough for her for now. She trusted him. Then she called Bari and Mazakin, and they understood her too. She used magic on him and directly stated that it's not about liking to waste her power on him. She needs to strengthen his legs, otherwise the whole group will slow down because of him. About him, MC asked in surprise, so this leg enhancement, thanks to her wind magic they increase speed, she said, looking displeased at the boat under the sail. So that's what this spell is called. He will need some time to get used to it. Ivica stepped forward and decisively declared that they would run the remaining floors to the oasis, after which she gave the order to move. They moved forward and everyone instantly rushed ahead, and he with surprise. Strange expression froze on his face, as if everything happened too quickly and it loudly betrayed him. It seemed the wind simply picked him up and carried him somewhere forward. He called Mazik. And he asked what kind of magic circle he had just drawn. He smiled broadly and said that it was a silvery, greasy coating and began to explain exactly what it was. Let it be oil that covered his body, only the back was untouched. The rest of the body would repel any physical attacks. He was stunned with surprise and immediately declared that he had never heard of such a cool thing. By the way, does he swim all the time? Meanwhile, he burst out laughing and started asking questions again. He loves chatting, right? If he keeps babbling like this, soon he will run out of breath. Bari rushed forward with a serious expression on his face and thought, if this Sherpa collapsed from exhaustion, it would even be better. Ro noticed the tunnel and warned them, and she thought, although his face is calm now, Nuku is calling. He called the Black Princess and said, they are approaching. 12 above, 7 ahead. Ivica called her and she rushed forward. She sharply snatched the daggers and coldly declared that the princess could leave everything to her. She rushed forward, certain that he would soon cry and start begging them for a break, and suddenly noticed Applebee's. These are monstrous insects as big as an apple, the acid they spit out from. Their stingers mercilessly dissolved the flesh. She easily dealt with these monster daggers and thought, as soon as he starts complaining, she will definitely tell him that he has been fired. Yuyuko was the central link. The link of the Twilight Sword, with her they could get through everything, one of the monsters. The others flashed past the vanguard and Nuku loudly called the Black Princess. They thought. She thought her beautiful princess does not need a man after all, she killed him. This monster with one strike of her sword, and she loudly said. We were told to go further and run the main hero with S. His gaze was a little surprised. He thought the group had not stopped for a second. He had never seen. Have you seen that? He glanced at the map and said, at the next crossroads you need to turn left. Turn around, she loudly ordered to stop. This excerpt is sealed. Is she sure there is no mistake here? He rejected everything and grimly declared, the right path is a dead loop. Descend to the next. The next floor you can only get there through the snake corridor, which winds to their left. Yuka called her and quietly whispered, only trust him remains. Nuku responded with a call in reply. She immediately understood him and whispered, it's a trap. They are moving through the right passage. It seems they are blocking the way, probably want to stop them at any cost. MC glanced that way. He immediately declared these are goblins. She looked at him and said. He whispered that these monsters blocked the right tunnel and people now had nowhere to escape. At that moment fleeing, a crowd of goblins rushed toward them and she said with a stone-cold calm on her face that he needed to hide behind the rock. He called Barry and quickly reported that there were about 40 of them there. Let them go there. After hearing the advice, he hid behind the stone. Rock said there are many inconspicuous places here, so they need to be careful, she said in a calm but firm tone. He said that they would manage, called her by name, and asked if she really did not want to go with them. She wasn't worried, was she? Without worrying for a moment, she calmly agreed and said that he could leave it. He told them, and instantly they rushed closer to the crowd of monsters. He took out several small stones. He raised his hand, launched a finger bullet into battle, and fired. He immediately dealt with several goblins and said that now they had to. They would have to go to that cave that remained there. He kept shooting. They threw stones and cast words until only 13 monsters remained. To the left she stood, her face cold and stone-like. He unleashed the spell Wind Dance magic that acted instantly. Grants strength to the body of the one who wears it. He rushed forward, glanced sideways in an instant, and he said she found 3 and instantly dealt with them. With one strike, she immediately destroyed these 3 monsters very quickly. The first throw of her dagger flew too swiftly. She muttered that she barely managed to catch it. In the room, she decided that he was also a goblin, but there are still those who know how to use their heads, and he calmly said that trouble might await them. Everything will depend on how skillful they are in their thoughts. She said she would take care of those. Those above, the rest of the team peeked from behind the corner and again. Roy thought that with this local, rather light moss he could see from afar their teamwork was simply impressive. Nuku destroyed G. The goblins received a volley right to their bodies. Meanwhile, Bari moved toward the goblins, approaching spots outside the line of sight. Distance in the frame. Being so close to filming for her is terribly dangerous, but the armor is completely PRSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSS sucks, he thought that this. In this battle, it was visible how Twilight Sword squeezes everything out of its strengths to the last drop. They really are the best team. Probably it's cool to be the chosen hero, they continued, rushing forward without stopping, dealing with goblins on the way. On the road she looked down and suddenly noticed a necklace around. Grabbing the monster by the neck, she shouted loudly. She did not remember how she killed the goblin with that necklace collar. Even fainting and death turned out to be in vain. He threw at her a body part of another monster. He instantly dodged and he meanwhile tried to escape. Go away, Nuku used the skill shot and said that. He will not let him escape. After that they called the princess and sternly warned, it's the end for them. Mika sharply turned around, called Mazik in and asked. He is ready, he said with. A smile was already playing on his face as if there really was a magic circle here. He sharply jabbed his finger at the protagonist said that they have to take this boy. Boy was with them, they moved on to where it seemed good for him and he asked what he was going to do. He drew a magic circle in front of him and set the earth in motion. The spell Earth Bridge. With this spell he blasted a passage right in front of him so loudly that the echo rolled in all directions and he was very surprised by it. When Bari asked what happened, she was already rushing we could return to him. He also asked so next the labyrinth on the 20th underground floor. He agreed and clarified whether he needed to. She was supposed to return and collect the goblin magic course, glanced at him and quietly said that it was not necessary because this is clearly not the best action. Magic core, a mass that forms inside the monster's body, and by collecting it you have exactly the experience needed to climb the rankings. She whispered that as long as when they caught up with her and blocked her way, the monster that appeared no longer changed anything. It's time to move on. She will go ahead and he must not fall behind. He glanced at. He barely looked at her with surprise, then called Mazekin. He calmly asked what he wanted. The main character turned to him and asked if Twilight Sword had any tactics on how to conserve strength. He was a little surprised and asked why he thought so. He said that he didn't even say a word about the team's overall policy, the structure of Twilight Sword. From how they acted and what they could do, it seemed to him that it was a usual plan, 3 fighters in the vanguard, but in reality everything was arranged so that she simply had nowhere to deploy for battle. In the last fight she didn't even move a finger, right? He quietly smiled and said he thought she was an ordinary guy. But it turned out he is very attentive. He thanked him for the compliment and said that, moreover, he had already managed to assess his true strength. Ivka called him by name. He calmly said that there was nothing wrong with it. They had to make a short stop. They stopped at the 18th underground floor. Bari fell to the ground and whispered, like tea. He was terribly exhausted. She drank some water, agreed, and said that she was running away from the very beginning without any pause. She called her and added that she tried so hard in the Tyro dungeon. It seemed she became even stronger than usual. She denied it confusedly and apparently decided to show what she was capable of. Ro took out a small elixir and asked, "Do you want to drink a recovery elixir?" He noticed her reaction and was embarrassed. He did not understand why she was so upset. So Mazekin smiled. It seems this guy has an interesting idea. He called her by name. Having named his name, he asked if there were any other skills besides Prophet. He smiled and said that besides flying he also had slow aging. No, Prophet was one of his special abilities. To touch and immediately know the nature of the object, it can be used on both people and things. Evrika said that the gift should be personal, but if he did not mind, could he tell her directly what exactly he had prepared? He answered with a slight displeasure on his face, and Evrika already knew about it, right? The only gift he had was to restore endurance. Nuke wiped the sweat from. He looked him in the eyes and admitted that he had never heard of such a gift. Bari asked. They asked him what kind of gift it was. Mazekin answered simply, roughly speaking, he finds it hard to get tired, the protagonist said. He explained that this gift is more common in monsters than in humans. This is exactly what Sherpa needs, because if he gets tired. Sherpa got tired and wanted to rest, they would abandon him, right? She felt very awkward and said that there was no point in that. He replied with. He barely smiled and showed this was his gift. Eureka, surprised, said, "That's wonderful." In the previous dungeon, the pace was always adjusted to Sherpa. Everything was decided by whether he was tired. But this time, they have nothing to fear. As soon as endurance returns, he can become much stronger. No one doubts this. Everyone wants to see it. He looked confused and said that he was just Sherpa, then instantly asked, what will they do if he runs out of energy? She and Mazekin burst out laughing and he only smiled in response. That's how it should be, MC asked. Do they really not get tired when endurance runs out? They need both food and water to stay in shape, but she waved it off and asked on which floor the next labyrinth would be waiting for them. He thought that she probably wasn't listening to him at all, looked at the map, and said that it was on the 20th dungeon floor. On the floor, it's better not to turn off the main road, let them go straight to the 24th floor, where they will be met. He listed all the monsters that live there and mentioned the manticore. It was the last one that finally caught her eye, and he said, the local king of fauna is found only on the 23rd floor, but that does not necessarily mean they will definitely encounter it on the way. So they need to hurry. She thought it all over, agreed with his plan, and decisively said that they would go there. It stunned him and he said that some monsters are endowed with a special gift. Isn't it better to just avoid them? Nuku replied, that's not a problem. The enemy locator gift allowed him to clearly determine the number of monsters. If he knew their exact number, it would be much easier to deal with them. He caught Rose's gaze and at that moment understood. Yes, that's exactly what she was thinking. He asked, no matter what, they will follow her advice, right? Right? Later they reached the 23rd floor and he quietly said that soon there would be a manticore here. Moxnabu also lived here, so they need to be careful. When they passed by, they noticed that the ground here was quite damp. It even seemed a bit slippery. Bari stepped into some slime, told them about it, and asked, but why is it here? He said that other Sherpas said they saw a moving labyrinth. It seems this slime is trying to copy the labyrinth, right? Yuika asked if it was possible to use the enemy pursuit. He was snooping, searching where they were moving. Nuku denied this and stated that he did not think there was any gift capable of that. No gift is capable of that. She asked if he knew where the slime was. She stepped forward and said that it was somehow too It is July here. He heard a growl called her and he warned ahead a monster. They came across a manticore and she said that. With a smile, and here he is, the very same manticore, exactly that. Correct. The protagonist looked at him and asked, I wonder if the manticore always acts a little. You alone? If so, then you must be much stronger than the other monsters living on the 23rd floor. Even monsters of level 35, she snatched the sword from. Smiling, he drew the sword from its sheath and said that he needed to go again and hide behind. Behind the stones, he agreed, moved away, and thought would she follow him. This time we fight. She stepped forward and said they needed to attack because he has a bad stance, she and Nuku. If someone aimed at the head, she should distract the manticore. Bari agreed and said that, in his opinion, she would do exactly that. He would pretend to be stuck. The monster growled loudly and she wrapped her car in a dance of wind and the spells of a sailor. Comrades both darted aside, leaving her standing alone in place, and the monster lunged forward, looked at her in surprise, and she thought that, caught by the dance of the wind and the spell of the sailing forces, she could leap onto the cliff in one jump. He noticed that she was stuck, became worried, and had no idea how she would manage to fight when the monster ran up so close. Her allies suddenly jumped into an inconspicuous place. Nuku used she. He uttered the spell like a shot and scattered countless stones that drove them forward. Manticore disappeared without a trace. The monster froze. The snakes. Her head opened and she began to draw magic directly into her mouth. Ari looked at the surprise froze on his face and touched her face and said that this was lightning magic. Azakin quietly smiled and also began. He used magic and said gloomily that nothing could be done. He cast the dirt bridge spell. The spell worked. A barrier grew before her, protecting her from even the magical attack of the monster. Nuku did not stop him. He stubbornly and without pause continued to strike. A strike from afar, she drew a dagger and declared that she would support him, while MC watched from behind cover. He held his breath and thought for a moment. What if Yuika really did not intend to kill him? Even if it was a manticore, it seemed to him that the Twilight Sword acted deliberately. She did not want to hurt him. From her words, it seemed as if they were forced. The monster stepped into the slime so sticky that even a mandragora would get stuck there for at least a second. She really wanted to. At that moment, Nuku aimed at the monster, preparing a trap for it. And said that she thought so, at least one of her paws get stuck. She came closer and with anxiety in her voice said that when Bari rushed forward, it was clear she did not know where to place her foot, as if instinctively trying to avoid that sticky slime. Suddenly a question spun in his head: how to hook the manticore so that it would stop. What if he directed it to where the slime would be inevitable? The slime was bustling, trying to escape. The manticore had already sneaked in here. The only way for the slime to get out of here was to squeeze through a narrow passage where the manticore simply could not pass. There should have long been a pile of slime there. The only problem was that now he must find that passage, and all this in such impenetrable darkness. A dark and large territory spread out before him. When he noticed moss flying nearby, he decided only one passage leads here. Turned out like this: the moss flew from there, a dead end. That is there. Here's such a small crack which is not on any map if you look from both sides. On both sides, he loudly called her and said that there was still space here with a pile of slime up to the knees like porridge. The manticore would definitely get stuck in it. She was behind him on that. Standing at the foot of the wall, she, a little surprised, agreed, and Nuku said. He said, but they had not even explored those places yet and knew nothing about them. About this, Bari exclaimed, how can he know what exactly is there if he hasn't seen it? He himself hasn't been there. Rose only said, there is no need for that, after all, they already. He had a plan map and their experience. He was telling them this like their Sherpa. Yuko was a little surprised by this then. She smiled and loudly said what they needed. To drive the manticore in that direction. That was decided. Her team agreed, and their attack was aimed so that the monster would be thrown exactly where he indicated. She shouted. He caught up with her and asked where exactly that place was. She dashed further. He rushed after her, clutching the map. He raised the map on his arm and said that it was exactly between the rocks. As soon as they got there, the monster really ended up right here. Underfoot spread a continuous slippery swamp, and he instantly sank into it. She realized this was exactly the right moment, and they rushed at the monster. Use the phantom needle technique. He plunged the blade into the monster's head and jerked back sharply. He turned to them, smiled, and said, "Done, he just. This Sherpa is simply incredible." She looked at the praise a bit confused and thought, along with that, she really hit the target. A single strike would not kill the manticore, he noticed the monster when. Behind her back, a sound rang out. He loudly called and warned of danger. Another part of the team froze in place. Nuku calmly replied that there was no need to worry about it after all. He knew the prince's patronymic, right? Right? Hearing the refusal, he exclaimed that her patronymic was Messenger of the Dead. Spirit, she had a gift. She could control the creatures her sword cut, the protagonist. Shock pierced him. The manticore bowed before her. Yuyukyu laid the sword on the monster's shoulders and said it would be named Nico. Bari, stunned, exclaimed that it was simply the worst name in history. Nuku stood nearby and agreed because he was curious what was that name. She turned to them, stroked the head of the manticore, and smiled, saying she had quite a useful ability. Neho. They need to move on. Their target was on the 47th underground floor. Where to next? He paused for a moment and said that it seems they need to go to the 20. On the 25th floor they continued their journey, and in his thoughts emerged the victories of Twilight Sword and the manticore. They were a real spectacle worth seeing with one's own eyes. Nico captured every monster she met. She directed her gift towards them, step by step, building her own army, and within a day dozens of monsters swarmed there. Monsters, the Twilight Sword's team made up of monsters. They are reaching the 40th floor where it was there they encountered a minotaur. Its body was like that of a human. Human with the head of a bull. Incredible strength, touching legend, exceptional end. Endurance, thick muscles, and high resistance to blows. When this monster, completely exhausted after battles with other monsters, Yuika approached him and she activated the Phantom Needle skill, named it Minoran, and with a cold smile warned that taming this monster is no easy task. Together with Nika, they would have to search for enemy positions. They continued on foot, and MC thoughtfully recalled how they first met. In the Sherpa Guild, she declared, Twilight Sword is a team of 4 people so powerful that it can simultaneously match several large league groups. When he first heard this, he brushed it off, thinking it was complete nonsense. Now he had no doubts about their strength. Suddenly, 15 skeletal warriors appeared before theme-intelligent monsters with swords and shields, forming groups and marching together. Ivitsa, with a serious face, called Nico and Minoran and firmly said they needed to deal with the advanced ones. The enemy is already pressing. BU4 must retreat under cover. Nuku and Barito surround the opponents and exhaust those whom BU5 and BU7 pushed back and bypassed. They immediately agreed, and Ro, standing aside, thought, the powerful abilities of each party member and the destructive force of the monsters unquestionably make Twilight Sword the strongest team. Suddenly, a skeletal warrior core fell into Ro's field of vision. It slammed on the floor, and Ro fixed his gaze on it. Suddenly, a thought about monster achievements lit up in his head. It's a type of equipment that drops. And it is precisely these that, when monsters are already defeated, are knocked off their spots by blows. So Ro began picking them up, deciding he had to give them away. When the fight with the monsters ended, he thought, should I gather them all at her place and what rank they have? 7 more skeletal warriors joined the ranks. Now the squad has 17 monsters. Mika looked at them intently and said what it was. It seemed the time had come to patch up the wounds and encourage everyone. She slightly fired up the monsters, and she began to use this. Ignite the magic and say that they all must stay in their places. She sharply drew a large magical circle in the air over the crowd of monsters and cast a healing spell. It impressed him. He said he had never seen such a magical circle. Mazakin smiled and said, this is a gift from the princess healing. Usually such magic for other monsters can only be used by the monsters themselves. He could not believe his own eyes and thought, could it be that she also has such magic? When the spell reached the monsters, their wounds instantly closed. He decided that this was synergy that arose thanks to compatibility. Gifts or their combination, this is called Renka. Simply put, Phantom Needle is used to manipulate Moan. Monsters are healed with healing to restore their physical strength. This is the best Renka. She is the best adventurer who storms labyrinths. Yuika turned to them and asked if it was time for them to rest too. His team agreed, and he felt that someone among them had special feelings for this amazing leader. Those who held on like a royal vassal, and those who held on as if Sue. Everyone was ready to act as long as Jarenka was safe. She pointed to the dark cave and said they would have to move to the next floor a little later. They sank deeper into the dungeon, and he thought, when planning a dive, the most important thing is the party level. Each floor had its own level, exactly the one needed for an adventurer of the corresponding rank to overcome it. Rank's Twilight Sword party was at level 12, and Manticore's hunting grounds on the 23rd floor corresponded to level 6. Wait a minute. Minotaur on the 40th floor turned out to be level 13. They cleared both floors without any problems. The dive report had to state that the entire process took only 2 days. Usually it would have taken 10 days, and such an incident would definitely have caused a stir, but while they were settling in, their camp was already set up near the oasis on the 47th floor. Current floor 47, corresponding level 15. The monster hunt had been going on for the 4th day, and it was here that they encountered creatures with the same skills as theirs. It had a human torso and a snake-like lower body. It was ruthless, sharp claws served as its weapons, and its physical strength was simply incredible. The strength was impressive. The protagonist said with horror that monsters living at such a depth were capable of destroying an entire squad. So they had to be careful, but Iveka smiled confidently and said they had nothing to fear. Here, she ordered to bring 6 skeletons, let them guard. These monsters froze and then instantly lunged forward, and they barely held back the attack. Skill attack, nails flew from the shields, and snakes also began biting their legs. She shouted loudly, "This is pointless." Poison did not affect her subordinates, so she turned to her own on the 7th and ordered them, break through their flank. Skeleton immediately listened to her words. Bounced off the cliff, rushed at the monsters, and struck one of them. He stabbed the sword into the back, but the blade could not pierce the tough skin. However, after his attack, a powerful explosive wave burst out, killing. Monster MC stood aside and watched in surprise and wondered, was this really a gift of influence? Nuku raised her eyes and loudly said, "This is." Something was coming through the ceiling. Bari also looked and loudly exclaimed, "That was." Turned out to be a huge slime. He also looked at it and loudly exclaimed, "This is slime. This slime is so aggressive that it dissolves even metal." Iveka immediately screamed, "Stay away from this monster." As soon as everyone scattered, he immediately said, "Close combat won't work." He called Oink from 1st to 4th and firmly stated that they must stay away and fight with spears, magic, and he called Black Princess and said firmly that the skills had already broken through the defense. Immediately from 5 to 8, she shouted Oink and ordered them to deal with them. Ro looked at this and decided she would deploy her monsters, relying on their special abilities. Thanks to this tactic, the whole party maintains its strength, and it is truly wonderful. He called her and said that it was buzzing so loudly here. If the fight drags on, other monsters will come to the sound and arrange a real carnival here. Note, this is what they call a case when hordes of monsters gather in one place and stretch out a series of battles. She froze and asked which of the already gathered monsters would cause the most problems. He replied that, in his opinion, it was the jelly frogs and the underground garrison. Mazikin glanced aside, smiled, and threw out, "By the way, something is approaching." "They are sneaking up." Bree heard the rumble of approaching monsters and shouted loudly. And after discussing, they agreed. These were the jelly worm frogs. These monsters were knocking down their victims one by one, like an unrelenting stream. Liquid was accumulating on their bodies. Iveka looked at the monitor. She looked at the monsters and asked, "It's like a water cannon, right?" and called Nico. Nico said she had to use the lightning trap spell. Everyone was already in danger here. Neutralize them. The manticore obeyed the order, and all the frogs were paralyzed, she said with a calm smile. Turned out that lightning magic works well against water monsters. She called Minoru in and spoke coldly and confidently, "Must kill them with one strike." The Minotaur. The animator stepped forward, swung a huge axe, and struck the monsters with a swing. With the flat side, he even froze from what happened, and she turned away and said, "This is much more F." He dealt with them one by one, and just then Nuku was called, Black Princess, and informed that 4 more were approaching. The hero became worried, called her, and said that on this floor, 4 monsters were hiding. Probably it was a garrison. They quickly formed squads, and in their defensive lines, there seemed to be no gaps left. At that moment, they looked like 2 formidable opponents. Suddenly near them, an indescribably cold gust of wind blew. Ari shuddered from the cold and quietly asked if this was real snow magic. Nuku looked away and whispered that the orc and the slime trail Prince Weref. They froze in ice. Mazikin laughed as soon as he saw several silhouettes in the darkness. And he said how vividly this carnival unfolds, the underground garrison that was. Together with smaller demons, armed with various equipment and thrown to the lower levels, came to join them. Iveka raised her sword and, smiling, said they have a mage and that's all. As if he is also skilled with a sword, Bari called the princess and asked what they should do with these skills. She said that she and Nuku need to work on them, help the skeletons, and not forget, be careful with snake venom. Smiling happily, she asked the princess if you could heal her if the monsters bit her, right? Wouldn't she run to fight those other monsters? Called Nico. Echo and Minoran say that after some time they will have to recruit them into their army. Meanwhile, they stopped at the oasis on the 47th floor. The host C whispered that the carnival gave him goosebumps, and it seemed that now he finally understood why they constantly got such unusual trophies. Ivica laughed, picked him up, and said that, however, he gave them all 4, and it all happened only because of him. They wanted stronger monsters to appear, that way they could strengthen their armed forces. She started eating soup and added, by the way, he cooked so deliciously and she simply adored this soup. Hearing this, he rejoiced and told Yoku that. He said that it was a miracle to be able to eat salad so deep underground. He turned to him with a smile and said, after all, they were moving at a fast pace. He heard the kettle boiling and said with a smile that Sarbo tea was already ready. Ready, he handed her a cup of tea and pondered. And she thought, if you also count the manticore under her command, there were as many as 50 monsters. From extra. One thing was clear from her face, she was completely exhausted. A potion would help, but it seemed First, she needed to gain strength with tasty food. He started cutting meat and said that the main thing. One of the courses smoked meat. It tastes better if sliced thinly, but Marie prefers to eat it like this. She was chewing a sandwich and with an expression of surprise on her face, said that she told him this while they were eating together. Together, he smiled and said that, of course, they often do that at home, and memories of the time spent with him came to her. A smile played on her face and her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Harassment, he said that while she was sleeping, his sister was pulling. She was having a lot of fun, she would Is her mind playing tricks on her again? She agreed, and a very happy expression blossomed on her face. An expression was readable on her face, and they continued talking. Mary cast a sideways glance at them and thought about that eternally cold beauty that impresses and enchants about the flawless print. Can a princess make such a face? What kind of freak did that? When they finished. After finishing washing the dishes, Mazakin asked, since the meal is over, it's time to check what they got. Maybe he will lay out everything they collected on the ground, Ro agreed. They freed the trophies and laid out on the ground everything they took from the monsters. Everyone rushed to look, and Bari just sat there. They eat soup, and he said with a smile, the lower the floor, the more variety there is. Elements, Nuku asked again, a little surprised. How did he manage to gather all this? He calmly replied, just found the time. Time between battles to pick up what fell and collect demonic cores, that was his job. He said this with a tense look. He spoke so evenly, yet gathered everything himself without any help. It was incredibly hard, a gift of endurance. Stamina recovery simply unreal. He even asked, as if casually, did he really think so? Mazakin looked over what they had obtained and he said that it seemed half of it would really be useful. The armor and weapons of monsters are cursed. Those who wear them will have a very hard time. Yueka asked if it was made by a dark blacksmith. The main character replied, yes, by the way, I heard that dark blacksmiths forge high CL class equipment from mine shafts and dark dungeons. Some specimens can even forge magical items. They shone with gifts and tangible effects. Keep in mind, a dark blacksmith is a special type of lesser demon who arms humanoids living deep in the dungeons. He warned that dealing with cursed items is deadly dangerous. They lower status and also drain physical and magical power. Though all parties reject such items, she said that it would not bring income. On the surface, no benefit at all. They heard the demons say that it was offensive to tears. They had put their soul into it. As soon as they heard this, the team immediately raised the alarm. He heard her and loudly warned, danger behind. The demon pressed the knife to her throat and ordered, like this. What people could not afford, the monster coldly called a premium service. They called the princess, their voices trembling with fear, and the demon said, such types of weapons are incredibly effective. They mercilessly kill adventurers. He shouted loudly that he must immediately release the princess. Immediately, they instantly got ready for battle, and she was soon about to ask something. Something, and everything froze. The demon ranger shuddered from her, jumped over, stopped, and sharply asked, are you asking for him? So she will have to listen very carefully. He has no name, those dark smiths, he was just mentioned. He is already among them. What a relief, he didn't need to talk to people for long. For a long time, MC looked at him and thought, this is definitely strange. Strange, there shouldn't be monsters here who can talk according to the records. Even when high-level monsters know the language, they remain silent. They act only on instinct. There is no point in talking, especially with those who have already become victims. This is not the only thread. Strange thing, the whole team rushed to the princess and called her. She called Nuka. Her face tightened with anxiety and her voice trembled. What happened to his detection skill? Nuka replied that he didn't know. He doesn't feel demonic energy at all. Mazakan with a serious face asked, this guy, can he or does he not have it? The demon approached the controlled monsters and said, if you think about it, they were from the upper floor. Why would they come down here? She ordered the first. First and immediately the first and second, grab him immediately. After that, the monsters attacked the dark blacksmith and he easily. Skillfully dodging their attacks, he loudly declared. He said it's very close. Ro's attention was caught by F. He closely watched every step of this demon. He again, without taking his eyes off for a moment, watched this, once more. Dodged the monster's attack and immediately received a court summons. He was gone and everyone froze, eyes wide open from sudden amazement. Suddenly he appeared near Evica, stepped on the blade of her sword and pressed it to the ground. It stunned him and he immediately decided that it was teleportation. He leaned toward her with a smile and said this, so it turns out she controlled them. He shuddered, loudly asked, "What is wrong with me?" He jumped back from her and said, "Here." Deadly aura so terrifying, he teleported right to her and uttered this. Only he met them here, he patted him on the shoulder. He touched his shoulder and threw out a phrase. If he hadn't pointed a gun at him, they could have become friends. He turned to him. He smiled, looked at him, and said that he was pleased so he would answer a few questions. He asked, his face confused and his eyes questions. He was looking for answers. A smile. A smile blossomed on his face, and he said that he was quite an interesting person. I liked it, but unfortunately, he still had to deliver it. Do everything so that he cannot stay. They will drown. A little more down to the right and they will definitely have a chance to meet again. They must not die, they must remain. Rotten corpses, people are so interesting, especially those who died very recently. He was about to. He disappeared and Bari asked the princess if she was okay. Yurika only kept a calm expression. Yuku came closer and said, "Don't worry, everything is fine." She assured that it happened for the first time. They encountered a monster without demonic energy, so nothing could be done. The main character answered calmly. They already knew this, it was a dark blacksmith, but there was no record of his abilities in the Sherpa Guild. She whispered that she had never met anyone like that in other dungeons. In the dungeons of Tyros, there were monsters they did not know. Clearing the dungeon completely is a risky business. Fact, it was a test of their determination as adventurers. Adventurers, he, slightly tensing his face, thought that. But the level of risk turned out to be much higher than they had imagined. She smiled and said that it was. It was quite interesting, and her desire to clear this dungeon only grew. It was the best thing that had happened to them in these 4 days of monster hunting. The secret passage led down, straight to the lower floors. It seemed they only needed to descend to the 48th floor, he asked. They asked with surprise, did they really agree on this only then? They agreed on the 47th floor. She turned to him and said, "Changes will be made to the contract." She smiled and added that after what that monster did to her, she did not want to interrupt the immersion. To her, MC whispered, no one had ever stepped on the floor below. There were not only monsters, but also. No one knew anything at all about this place. They needed to get to the surface and replenish supplies before. About how to move forward, that was his advice, like the Sherpas. She agreed and asked again. She understands this, but at the same time. So what? How could one of the Twilight Sword Squad not be confident that he would endure, pass through, and explore the 48th floor? He suddenly got confused. Hearing her words, he thought so they work as a team, and he, the legend. The legendary sage, did not use any offensive magic at all, so Mazuakin yawned loudly and said that. After such a heavy meal, he immediately felt sleepy, and he sighed, thinking, in other words, they still have an ace up their sleeve. He took a deep breath and whispered that it was unfair because he had nothing to respond with. She smiled apologetically and said that she felt he would listen to her decision until the end. Decision? He got confused and asked again, what does that mean? So this is how. How does she manage to handle everything? She laughed, smiled, and asked, does he really think so? Yuri, angry at their conversation, broke between them and shouted loudly that Twilight Sword would deal with anyone. Anyone could have done it at any moment and without his help, and this thought simply threw him off track, so he muttered that he probably had no choice anyway. He would have just listened to her. He said it was wonderful and then let them set off into the unknown later. They descended to the 48th floor of the dungeon, and a thought flashed in his mind. This is a dive into N. What was approaching had not yet been on the map, and he whispered that the luminous moss was located very high. And here an incredible amount of mana accumulated, but this surface is not a reliable support at all. Take it. Harry, with a contemptuous half-smile, threw out, now that they are already here, this is almost useless. Now he is incapable of anything, right? Ro agreed and thought that as soon as he arrived at the floor where no person had yet stepped. It had become customary. Sherpas, used to relying on the experience and instincts of travelers, always first drew the map. They also had to notice everything around and take notes. They went further and Barry called the princess and said. They reached the oasis here and Nuku said that he saw a monster ahead, and Bis suddenly caught her attention. She asked if it was above the oasis, looked there, and surprised, whispered that she actually saw something there, a huge grape cannon. Even if there was something here, she was sure, there was no sense in it and it was completely uninteresting. On the way here, they did not encounter any monsters, and she confidently pulled further somewhere someone still burns with the desire to pass through this place. But she whispered to me whether they have already found that oasis, the very one that means the goal is achieved, Yueka. Monica agreed and decisively said, they need to rest a bit and then return to the surface. The protagonist cast an interested look at this, and Bari was glowing as if the answer had already been born in his head. They said that plant needs to be cut down, the night seed that this monster dropped could be like that. It was sold for a very good price because it was for regenerative medicine, so he was still looking around. He looked at it and decided, the cannon with the vine is just an ordinary plant mob. Monster, it was only necessary to look closer, and it immediately attacked the travelers too. It threw seeds from its tubular pods right at them, so even beginners could easily defeat this monster. What is this plant, which usually lives on the upper floors, doing here? Its leaves and tubes are a bit different. He turned to them and shouted loudly, this is not a sample rifle, do not touch it. No sooner had he said this than Bari bit off a piece of this monster. The monster's vine, and at that moment a powerful explosion thundered. Suddenly a bunch of thorns tore off from the plant and hit him, and he felt the strength slowly leaving him. These thorns turned out to be poisonous. With a tired, betrayed voice, he called the others and anxiously asked if they were okay. He saw how the whole team. The participants were injured, they could not even move from their place. He fell to the ground and thought that. At first he thought he was just getting cold, but his hands and feet did not obey him at all, they did not move. Body seemed to melt, slowly dissolve. Is this death? Yuyuko approached him. She cast the spell Dark Dewdrop. She pronounced his name and called out so that he would wake up, and he heard her voice. Her voice broke off and the sense immediately returned. She sharply got up and shouted loudly. For her, she said that she had cast a healing spell, so poison must come out of his body, it seems. She removed all the thorns from him, but he still has to check once more just in case. He sincerely thanked her, asked her to wait, and quietly asked if she pulled him out with her bare hands and whispered that he shouldn't worry about it. Lowering his backpack to the ground, he said that he was still bleeding, he would give her a healing elixir. She objected, now is not the time. It was visible how the poison was rapidly spreading throughout the body. Though first they needed to save the others, he rushed after her and reached out. He offered his help, looked around, and seemed to plunge into thoughts. The oasis disappeared as if it had evaporated. How large it was. It was an explosion, everything trembled around. If not for the effect of the silvery, oily coating, they would definitely have died. They approached Bari, carefully examined her, and he decided, this is terrible. He managed to protect her eyes, but the rest. Her face and body, he called her and said that she must use. He used tweezers, I just took them from him, agreed, and to get out. As soon as they finished, they together began to pull out the needles. Then I cast magic on her and she immediately regained consciousness. Yuka called her and asked if she was okay. She nodded and he handed her a vial of potion, quietly asking, drink. Drink this. Mazikin flew up to them and shouted loudly, Black Princess. He asked her not to forget about him. If I die here, the world will not survive this loss. They were quite surprised, only one needle hit him, and he replied that it was. Fortunately, his cloak had the gift of enhancing. Later they also healed Nuka, she looked exhausted. He threw out, only monsters remain, and MC approached closer. He approached her and handed over a portion of the potion. She thanked him and said she would place an order. He ordered them to guard her. Mazikin rushed to Bari and gently hit her on the head with a stick. He addressed the staff and assured, right now is the best moment to apologize. She threw out, you are an irritable old man, but still obeyed and quietly asked for forgiveness. Yuka approached them and said, only Roa felt the danger, so she is not to blame. Healing magic is only within the power of a few. So if it worked for the Black Princess, it turns out he would have said the same, would have done the same. In any case, for a simple plant monster, he had too much strength and poison, it could have been that it was. Bare floor, he said that usually they considered plants weak, but now they would have to change their minds. Everyone turned in an instant as soon as Yuika fell to the ground and reached her. Bari caught her in his arms and he asked anxiously what had happened to her. He sat down nearby and said that it must be because of poison, and she was surprised by this and loudly exclaimed that it was impossible. The princess has resistance level 3, she is sturdy. He was not susceptible not only to burns or stun, but to any influence at all, and was sure that this was true already at level 3. This resistance withstood almost everything, but still did not completely eliminate the probability, not 100. More precisely 100%, he asked exactly that, and after that she no longer applied those dark drops of dew on herself. Nuku, face tense from strain, said firmly, "This does not work on a magic caster." This confused him. He noticed that her breathing was weakening and warned if it continued like this, her life would be in danger. Does anyone have medicine or potion against poison? He did not count on anything and did not replenish supplies before going out. Bari said that they did not need Twilight Sword medicine. They no longer had anything left. There was so much poison that the empty space had to be filled with potions to somehow restore mana. He went over all the options in his head and finally understood. Their plan relied entirely on Yuika's physical condition. He noticed her trying to say something. He leaned closer and asked what had happened. She was writhing. Pain tore him from the inside, and suddenly it seemed to him that her words became completely unintelligible. Listen, he said that she was about to start delirious. As Yukin suddenly remembered something, spoke aloud with anxiety and faltered. It was subtly emphasized, "This is bad." He stopped using levitation and stepped away from them, the protagonist. I saw it in his gaze and understood. He was going where Mom was. The monsters were watching them. He sneaked up on these monsters and with some serious expression froze on his face, he released a beam. About the banishment of light, he was sure it had to work. He waited for the spell to end and blew up all these monsters. He asked in surprise. "This is why they had to be removed," Nuku said. "If the Black Princess loses consciousness, the effect of the Phantom Needle will disappear," and he immediately understood this. He thought that then all these monsters would surround them. "Even in such a devastating gift, there is a weak spot," he said. He promised that he would cure her, then quietly added, "First they need to take the backpack." Next to him, he laid out his tools and various potions, and said that he was not sure if it would help, but he would still try to make some medicine. Medicine, she needs to be laid horizontally on the ground. He poured something into a mortar and ordered, "Start with stimuli." Stimulator, he brought a finger with medicine to her face and said, "This will be wonderful. It would be wonderful if some sharp smell could actually wake her up. The week has already begun." The smell made her emit only isolated sounds, but she was still unconscious. MC looked at her. Her breathing was still weak, he thought. He needed a cardiotonic. He prepared it and decided, it needs to be mixed with. "Take some water and give it to her just in case," he said. He needed to. "I need to ask something. Is any one of them dating her?" Barrier. His face froze in confusion. What is he talking about? He took. He held the medicine in his mouth and asked, "Does this mean no?" He froze in surprise and he leaned over her and he moved her to Wiku and stubbornly poured her medicine into her mouth. He swallowed the medicine with a kiss. Nuku, noticing that she was approaching them, ordered to stop. "Stop!" She stepped back, took him aside, managed and put the medicine in her mouth. And he said she will do it. He asked her to wait and she said there is a trick to make an unconscious person take medicine. She did not listen and it caused. She suddenly coughed loudly. He immediately became worried. He pronounced it like a verdict. It was the same line, but this time it did not work. "Will everything be all right with the Black Prince?" "Princess," he thought with a worried look. The poison has weakened her heart, so cardiotonic could have helped, but he no longer had it. That's true. He firmly holds a candy in his hand. It is made from the mental power obtained from potion. It was created to harden the mind so that she would remain sane. He crushed the candy to dust like a stone, poured it into her mouth, and that was it. And he splashed water, poured the medicine into her mouth. Nuku called him with anxiety that was visible on his face. And he asked if he was sure about this medicine. He looked at him. He began to take off his outerwear and said, "To be honest, he had no idea, but this is not enough for proper treatment. They need return to the surface as quickly as possible. Find someone who can heal her from with magic. Does anyone know spells that enhance endurance?" He covered her with his clothing, and Mazakin said he could use a few spells at a basic level. The main character explained, "Then you have to sometimes cast it on her, otherwise when the medicine's effect wears off, this will be her end." He picked up Wika in his arms and Bari stretched out her hands and assured that she could carry the princess. He looked at her and said that even if on the way here they destroyed most of the monsters, he was sure so many still remained. She, together with Sir Nuku, had to be ready for anything, and she agreed with that. After that, they all rushed to the exit of the dungeon. He ran alongside her. She asked if he was really sure he could manage without a map. He replied that he remembered the way they were going. There were no problems, he just guided him where to go. He asked him to wait, muttering that he sensed two monsters. "Wait, they are right above them and there are more and more of them. This is blood. Bedbug cockroaches say these monsters suck blood from the still living. Only living victims lay eggs there. They are incredibly fast," he called her. He asked if she could cast a sales spell on them. She agreed and he shouted loudly, "But then they need to get rid of what?" Faster, he thought, his heart tightening with tension. They needed to get to the surface as quickly as possible, and they moved on. He raced along the 48th floor, looking into Yuika's face and thought about saving other lives. Others, and besides, she had to endure unbearable pain from the poison, but she had incredible abilities. Holding her tighter, he lost track of time again and thought he would not let her die in such a place, although sometimes he still had to think the same way. A little later, on the 41st floor of the dungeon, they took a short break, and MC calmly admitted that he had given her a dose of sedatives. Because of this, she was only one step away from death. This will prevent the poison from spreading further through her body. They were terribly worried, and Mazikun calmly and confidently explained, the blood slows down and begins to clot. After all, at first it was used as a poison. Does he really want to use this effect to counteract the action of another poison? He agreed and said, now all that remains is to wait. Iveka opened her eyes. Everyone immediately noticed this, and without hesitation he called to the princess, and she, barely audibly, asked where they were, Bari and Nukud. He did not catch her words and simply replied that they were now on the 41st floor. They had to go there. We need to get to the surface and take her to the healer. She was given some medicine, but later she will have to take more. It must be. It was incredibly hard, but she learned to make every breath. Everything depended on her determination to live. Live on air, she tried to say something, but the words came out in fragments. He asked with a barely noticeable smile. Is she implying that she is the best here in willpower? This is exactly what they expected from her, so she had to keep up the pace. He began to stand up and shouted Nuku. He lunged at him and barked that even though he has the gift of restoring composure, he still carries. All this pressed on him. Could it really be better to throw away the backpack to move faster? He grabbed. He picked her up in his arms and said that he was going to do it right away as soon as his legs got tired, but they were still holding up. The goal was still far away, so panicking was pointless. She called him by name. He turned to her and asked what happened. She slowly tried to say something, drawing out the words with her very tired voice. He instantly understood. She is asking why he helped so sincerely. Rose said that there is no sense in this. But the reason was special. Did he really have to save the person he loved? Her surprise and expression on her face. Ari's face flashed red. It angered him. He grabbed the other by the shoulder and loudly. Probably, he asked, how dare he say such a thing at such a time? Yet he asked calmly. Calmly, and yet he could look so angry. It turned out she still had a lot of strength left, right? She was confused by this. He turned around and asked Nook how he was feeling. Nook replied that everything was fine and added, if needed, they should drink the potion that restores endurance. And now they moved on. After some time, Aveka came to in the clinic and, loudly surprised, asked, what the hell is going on here? The doctor, who had just used his magic on her, gasped in surprise and exclaimed loudly, this is a clinic. But his healing magic have scared her. She calmed down a bit and she reached the exit and, grumbling displeased, declared that since she could move, it was time for them to get out of here. Mazakin was sitting nearby. She apologized to him for the interference and sincerely thanked him for the help. It seemed to her that just a moment ago she was drowning in the depths of the dungeon chamber. She remembered almost nothing. Probably she fainted on the way here. He called the Black Princess and with relief said that it was good that she was okay. She agreed and asked him to tell what exactly happened. He smiled and replied that she was so impatient. Even then, when she almost died, under the guidance of this young Sherpa, they managed to get to the surface in just one day. Of course they tried to. They did their best to avoid a fight, but could she have imagined that they would escape from the 48th floor? They did not encounter anyone, only young people. The young Sherpa looked unflappable even in such a situation. She asked where Bari and Nuka were now, and he replied that they had been separated. She chose the short path, but there was only one exit, so she shouldn't have worried. He apologized and said that because of his daughter's recklessness, she lost her. Calmly, with an unflappable face, she looked around the room and said, it's okay, let him not worry. And she was also to blame for something. This wouldn't have happened if she had acted more carefully. She recalled how the main hero helped them in the dungeon and gratefully said that he really saved them. He agreed with. He smiled and added that this hero helped her the most. This young man passed the medicine mouth to mouth. She even blushed with embarrassment. And then he loudly declared that Bari even counted how many times he did it. 7 times. He rushed to the exit and said he would pay the bill. Gold only for one spell. Here it is, robbery. He looked at him confused. Did that mean she kissed him, or what? By the way, the taste of the medicine was still on her tongue. She was sure it was too bitter. Who would have thought that her first kiss? The kiss left a bitter aftertaste of medicine. At that moment, he rushed to the clinic and called the doctor. The director asked how Yuika was feeling. He came into her room and spoke to her, but she paid no attention to him. And she believed she was living in some fantasy like other girls, but everything turned out completely different from what she imagined, even though he saved her life, so she must be grateful. But then he said there was no special reason. She is not sure what exactly he was trying to convey to her. Tell me, how can she now look him in the eyes? He approached her bed and called again. When she noticed him, she was overwhelmed with embarrassment and loudly asked how long he had been sitting there. He calmly said that he had just arrived and everything they got during the dive was left in the Travelers Guild. Both Nuku and Bari are resting at the inn. She, glancing at him awkwardly, asked, "By the way, can she ask you something?" He agreed, and she has to. He whispered uncertainly that his words were here, in the dungeon. She was interrupted. The doctor loudly called MC's name and, pronouncing each word with displeasure, stated that he could not enjoy alcohol. Alcohol while they were here, that was out of the question. He already had to get them out of here. He turned back to him and said that he did not consider it normal to drink during working hours, that is. His plan seemed the best. The doctor asked him to be quiet. He turned to her, apologized, and said that he always behaved like that. She can move, right? She agreed, and he said it was already time for them to go. He left. Outside, he thanked the doctor, but the doctor just closed the door in front of them. They walked down the street, and he promised he would return as soon as he took them to the tavern. His sister was still with relatives, so he needed to pick her up from there. "Lift her," said Yuka. It was right. First they needed to show Mari so she would calm down. He agreed. The man approached and said he recognized that noble appearance. Could it be? So he really is Lord Sage. Mazikun turned to him and confirmed that yes. She looked around and asked who he was. Ro called him Mayor Barraman, and he replied with a joyful smile that he was pleased. It stuck in their heads when they reached that evening. He had no idea what she was talking about, but she remembered. That day the three of them, she, he, and Mari, went to a restaurant. He asked if it was a neglected place, or if he interrupted something. She objected and sharply said that first there were 3 short dives planned, but only the first was completed. Their goal remained unchanged, to completely clear the Tyros dungeon. Now they had already reached the 48th floor. Still unknown, the report was to be submitted later. He did not recognize her, and Mazikun said that she is the leader of the Extinguished Sword. Barraman froze with surprise. Could this really be the Black Princess? She set a record in such a short time, it's simply incredible. He asked for permission to invite her again to another event, but didn't finish speaking. Yuika said she appreciates his kindness. Her mission is to go through all the dungeons of this world and cleanse each one of them. Svit glanced at the main character and asked, "By the way, who is he?" He introduced himself and said he is from Sherpa Guild and he remembers it. He remembered him and said he heard he is very talented for such a young age. He thanked him. He said, "Maybe so, but I am not worthy of such admiration," and with a smiling look added, "The glorious heroes of the East. And the best Sherpa in the city is simply fantastic." She called the mayor and said they needed to rest, so she apologized. Azakin smiled broadly and said he did not mind skipping the formal dinner. She apologized, called him in. The 3 of them set off. Barraman watched them with his eyes. Mazakin said that just a few days after the first dive, they managed to explore a new level, and then he came. She visited Sherpa Guild and greeted Jim with a smile. Jim responded to her the same way. He gently called him Little Barry and asked if she just wanted to find out who came at such a time. After an hour, he smiled, sighed deeply, and said that it was time for her to stop treating him like a child. He was already over 40. She was 40, and she simply replied that his name was too difficult to pronounce. What did he want, after all? He fell silent for a few seconds, and then she said that he was too. Let him not worry, everyone had already gone home, and she stayed here. He remained alone, called himself MC, and said that he was currently working with the squad, the heroes of the East. He heard that they were exploring the dungeon at an abnormal speed, and had already reached the 48th floor. She agreed, and smiling, said that they were aware. She was just updating the maps in the guild, and as soon as he said that, she flinched from surprise. From now on, he wanted to tell her a simple thing. It was time to change her attitude towards him. She was already about to ask something, but he anticipated her and said that after the death of his parents, the only family was. In his family, there was only a younger sister. She asked how he knew that, and he replied that Gunji told him about it in a bar. He spoke as if Marie was his sister. She did not like it. She clenched her fingers. He clenched her hand into a fist and sharply asked, "So what?" He waved it off as if to say, "It's nothing," and did not try to make her do anything. Twilight's sword still remained a very important guest for them, but there was only one demand. He asked to protect his sister. How much? How much could he disgrace his Sherpa pride? The next morning after the dive, Ivake knocked on Ro's door. He called his name and asked if he was home. Marie heard. When he heard her, his face lit up with joy. He whispered that it was the voice of his sister, smiled quietly, and asked to open the door. She instantly did so and replied, "Welcome." She greeted her with her own words. He smiled and asked how she was, and she immediately noticed a human silhouette. Next to her stood a silhouette. Suddenly, he popped out from behind the door, and she saw Nook, who unexpectedly turned out to be. Her aura was threatening, and it made her tremble. She apologized for. He said this and assured her no need to worry, he was her friend. Suddenly, fear overwhelmed her like a wave, and at that moment she was introduced. She herself told him how old she was. He froze in silence. She called, and he immediately apologized. He bowed low, introduced himself, stated his age, and sincerely thanked them for accepting him. This surprised her a little, so she couldn't help but ask what he was doing here because she saw no reason to care about her age. The protagonist approached, wiped his hands with a towel, and asked what brought him here. "They brought me here," she said, apologizing for disturbing him so early in the morning. "Good morning." She wanted to thank him, and he wanted to talk to him about the dive report. He let them inside, and after some time Nuku came out of his house and said he was counting on him. He called the lady and with a tremor in his voice asked her to return by sunset, otherwise Barry would get angry again. She agreed. When he left, she turned around, apologized, and embarrassed said she didn't know, as if they were going on a picnic, and disappeared so suddenly. He calmly said she didn't need to worry, everything was fine. The traveler's report and the Sherpa's report, if that's doesn't add up, they will be called later to sort out the details. Fortunately, they managed to discuss everything before submitting their reports. She was a little surprised by his reaction, and frowning a little dissatisfied, said that Nuku had always been very strict on this matter. Truth, she no longer remembered how many times she had heard him say it, and every time it was important. Mario approached her and, with a tremor in his voice, Hesh asked his sister if she wanted to join them for a picnic. Yuhiko asked in surprise if she really could. MC nodded in response, smiled friendly, and said she said she really wanted to go with them, thanked for the invitation, and agreed to go with them. Later they came to me and said again that she really wanted her to go with them. Arrived at the forest outside the city, she went ahead, called her sister, and declared that this was exactly where Gajabarii were gathered and insisted stubbornly on this. He urged her faster, and she, calling her by name and pulling more slowly, said that one could fall if running like that. Mari stopped by the bush. She started picking berries and assured that they would make incredibly tasty jam. A bit surprised, she added that she knows a lot about it, smiled happily, and confirmed she knows even more. For example, any rabbit can be sold for a good price, but if you mix rabbits with good meat and those with bad meat, you won't expect big sales, and also the vegetables at the store opposite their house are always rotten. Her brother showed her everything, and when Yuika looked at him with a very dissatisfied face and said so, it became clear. That's how it is, and he began to worry and thought that he just wanted to teach her a few tricks that might come in handy in life. After some time, he probably overdid it. The girls fell soundly asleep on the blanket. He looked at them, barely smiling, and thought that he was a father. It seems they both calmed down. The words of Sira Mazakin reached him. She cannot sleep while the phantom needle is working. Now everything fell into place. During the dive, she did not sleep a single minute, and they spent almost a week in the cave. That's why their team avoids long dives. Why did he choose exactly those words? Perhaps the very thought of how she suffered from the poison and was forced to rely on. Only by the strength of her own will did she make him feel. She needs a reason to. Wait, of course you can explain it that way, but if it were really true. Case, isn't it so? It can be found among many other words, right? For example, let's imagine something about diving. He looked at her face and thought. He thought that she was incredibly beautiful, and her courage conquered him even more. She encounters difficulties and how instantly she overcomes them. I feel the same, and that expression on her face when she sees Mari, it seems. Looks like he likes children, and also the willpower he noticed in him. Dungeon, it seems now he understands. These words burst out. He let these words go exactly as his heart suggested, so. Now it became even easier for him to breathe. Ro called her by name and assured that his word. He closed his eyes and felt finally everything became clear to him. Suddenly Yuika woke up sharply, grabbed him by the collar and with him. He blushed with doubt on his face and quietly asked, is he telling the truth? Now this confused him, and he agreed, and she decided that it was truly a confession. She quietly asked, confused and not fully understanding. So there is more than one of them. She may have never been in a relationship, but she perfectly understands how it works, so he can rely on her. His puzzled smile said more than words. It felt like their lives would soon change beyond recognition. Confession, she said that in the imperial capital where she once lived, she had a servant named Tai. She once told her, as if putting her heart into those words, "Remember these words well. If you ever find a person dear to your heart, first you need to truly get to know each other." So she asks, let her speak out. To start the grandest building in the city, Temple of Galactica, Mother Earth, right? He nodded, agreed. She confessed, the headquarters of the Galactica Order is a temple in the very heart of the capital, and it was within its walls that she grew up as a spiritual priestess of Viscatus. He asked, so is that why she is always called the Black Princess? She agreed and said that black hair and eyes are an extraordinary rarity among people. When the high priest encountered her near the statue of the goddess, he was suddenly enlightened with a revelation. The goddess whispered that her blessing had descended upon this child, and they must raise her pure and innocent, all thanks to her. Yet evil will disappear from this land and harmony will reign here again. Eureka said that the heart of the dungeon, that which is hidden in the deepest part, has a limit. As soon as it reaches it, it will explode, and this explosion will distort the surface with an incredibly concentrated magical essence, and this will be the final end. Other continents have already met their demise. They have turned into dead soil. To save this land, they need to manage to neutralize the core before it reaches the dangerous limit. To help people in this mission, God gave them power and the protagonist. Magnus listened carefully, and one thought spun in his head. Perhaps these are the gifts. She recalled her own. He remembered her past and said, because she is a priestess, people hoped that she would become a great adventurer. So she had to accept her fate. The essence of the greatest dungeon in the imperial capital, Endless Dungeon, has almost reached its limits. After such a revelation, she could no longer sit idly. Not only will her hometown be destroyed, the whole land will perish. People live only once. You were given the task to save this world, and that is not a bad fate at all. He froze in surprise. And she said that if she reaches the very heart of the dungeon in this city, she will be able to level up, and that meant ahead another step. She took a step forward to prevent the end. After meeting him and Maria, she had even more reasons to save this world. He looked with surprise at the face and thought that, who would have thought that the person who loved him was a hero of some kind? If someone told her that she was destined to save the world, Mari would have been stunned. He smiled and promised to support her in everything, both as an ordinary person and as a Sherpa. She gladly thanked him. He smiled joyfully and said that it reassured him, and a few days later, Sherpa Guild held a meeting, and MC decided that the shortcut found on the 48th floor, along with the discovery of a new oasis, was something. It was real breaking news. The news instantly spread throughout the city, and one of the workers happily called the master and exclaimed that the Sherpa map had been updated. Gunji looked at him and said that he had done a great job. From now on, only high-class travelers would submit requests to the expedition. This will definitely grow several times. They should remember this. Ro sat next to him, and he decided that all those herbs and ore found on the uncovered floor could bring huge profits. He did not even doubt it. Confident that Yuika and her squad would break through to the lower floor and eliminate the core, otherwise the city would inevitably destroy everything in the future. The confused Sherpa approached him and, still not believing, asked, on what grounds did he secure such a large contract with someone like Twilight Sword? Sherpa did not even know they were in their city. Honestly, he himself had long wanted to be a candidate for such a job. Jima came to them and stated that they had many special requirements for Sherpa, and it turned out that he was the only one who met all the criteria. They called the master and said that at least he could inform them of the date they planned to throw the die. He was burning with desire to see them. He had heard that their leader was incredibly beautiful, and there was also a legendary sage in the team. Bunji said that he already knew how they would behave, so he was asked not to talk about it. She said that their leader did not like noise, so they came incognito, but their last die. By the way, this dive caused quite a stir. Is he really sure about this? Is it true that the heroes of the East will be able to cleanse there? In their dungeon, the protagonist nodded and said that, compared to all the teams he had worked with, he considered they sincerely believed they could manage. She looked down thoughtfully and quietly said that she understood him. She turned around and the Sherpas whispered that the Twilight Sword was still very incredible. They have to raise their glasses to them. He looked at her and felt anxious. I was tormented by anxiety from the sudden silence. Rather, it was a premonition of something. That is why. At that very moment he felt it, and later Morella came home. He knocked on the door and said hello. She opened it and looked at him simply and attentively. He approached and asked if he was late. She handed him something in a bag, then rummaged in her purse, took something out of her pocket and put it back in the purse. He apologized and explained that the work had been delayed. It was for her. He asked to distribute to everyone. She took it and he asked, "So these are the same candies, right?" It's not that she doesn't like them, she was just worried about the health of her teeth. After that, they went into the house and she quickly said that they needed to hurry and take their seats and apologized again. They had already started eating. He thanked her, greeted Dossie who was sitting at the table eating, then looked at him and asked if it was true that he was hired by the heroes of the East, all of them. Everyone settled at the table and started eating, and MC nodded and said he was very grateful for it. And at that very moment he realized this was the highest paid job of all he had ever had. He said with surprise that it was incredible and thought that this was a monthly dinner meant to bring them closer. Supposedly their blood ties, at least everyone pretended so, but in reality it was a monthly report on his finances. Dossie said that apparently he had collected a pile of money and smiled. He had enough gold coins. Coins, I think a few dozen, no more. His children thanked for the food and ran to the room and he started counting. Counting on his fingers, he and Morel figured out what exactly he was doing. Apparently, he needed to finish eating quickly. He sighed and said. He seemed to be calculating in his head how well he was doing for his age. He smiled and said he could only work in peace because they took care of his sister, laughed and added that no thanks were needed, there are no orphanages in this city. So as long as they are family, taking care of the children is their duty, right? Ro apologized and decided that every time he picks up Marie, he handed them compensation 2 silver coins, but they, as always, didn't say a word about it. They don't take bread, they don't keep accounts. The bread is hard, the soup is thin, but he still can't refuse under any circumstances, because they promised to take Mari if he dies in the dungeon, like in. According to the condition, they will take everything he had, but honestly, he left half of his money with Gunji so she could give it to his sister when she dies. When he grows up, eccentric but trustworthy, he called her and poked his finger at his face. She said a crumb got stuck here. She took it out and after that they really did finish. He picked her up in his arms, whispered that she had fallen asleep and that he would go home. They said goodbye. Goodbye, and already outside he said that it seems when they look at him, they only see a big B. A bag of money. She listened silently and he quietly apologized to her and said that all these problems fell on her while he was working. She was asleep and called her brother with a gentle smile. He smiled and she even thought he was so cute. Later, a huge crowd of the most diverse people gathered at the adventures. Guild Secretary of Adventures Sura said. She was told that everyone who wanted to get a report on the Twilight Swords dive had to fill out forms and submit them. Only after that could they start. A wave of travelers approached her one by one. They began submitting applications to the Guild of Sherpa Secretaries. Anne came to help with the work and brought a whole stack of forms. Sura sincerely thanked her. For him, one of the adventures that brought a joyful smile. He handed her his form and at that moment accidentally knocked over the ones she had brought. Sura became furious to the point of madness. She slammed her palms on the table and loudly exclaimed that they must obey orders and not stray from the line. She directly forbade them to go forward. Everyone must stay in formation and wait their turn. Whoever fails this small task will be forever blacklisted. The frightened adventurers lined up and loudly agreed. She threw out, "Wonderful, let them if they want," and sat down in her seat with noticeable displeasure. He called her and said that they urgently needed to sort out these documents. She looked at her with admiration and instantly agreed. The protagonist entered and looked around in surprise at the crowd of people standing inside. It seemed to him that he had come to greet Yueka. It seemed he could not even find her here. He approached the counter, called Anne, and said she was working tirelessly, and she replied through tears in her eyes, "There is simply too much work here." Sura irritably called him and asked if he had come to apply, but he was confused and said that he had just come to meet someone, the leader of the Devil's Wheel adventure part. At the party, Sog approached him and said that it seemed he was managing, and indeed, he had managed. He put his hand on his shoulder and whispered, "So he was the guide for the heroes of the East, right? He shouldn't get a big head just because important people hired him after all. He remained an ordinary porter." His teammates came closer, agreed, and he, smiling, said that now he must tell them everything. Give them everything. What gifts does their group have and how do they fight? The secretaries looked at them with anxiety in their eyes. The master of ceremonies called him and sharply asked if he had forgotten all the rules, as if he was stuck in the middle rows. He would never have revealed such personal information, especially if it was someone who couldn't keep their mouth shut. This made him angry. He grabbed him by the collar and loudly pulled him. He loudly called him an idiot in front of the whole hall and demanded hotly, "What did he just say?" Sura shouted loudly at him and ordered him to stop. At that very moment, Yuka came down from the second floor. He saw how the travelers gathered and wondered what had happened to everyone. He couldn't break through the crowd. People stood as if rooted to the spot. Standing before her, he confidently declared that he was betting on Sag, so he would also place bets on Ro. She was immediately struck that they called him by name, and then the people around them began to incite them to fight. She became terribly angry and began to emit such a strong aura that it scared everyone around, and she said in a serious tone for everyone to step aside, after which she rushed forward. She walked a little further and suddenly saw an unfamiliar adventurer holding him by the collar. When he raised his fist, she approached closer and he felt creepy because of how threateningly she held him. Sag tensed and precisely because of this asked what she wanted. She said very seriously with a stone expression that he must clean up his dirt. Don't touch her, dear. He was surprised. After all, she had just called him that. She shouted loudly that he must do it immediately because of this very reason. He was terrified to madness, fell to the ground, and he began to crawl away from her. She looked at him and fear froze in her eyes. A terribly serious expression froze on her face, and the main character called her. And he reassured her there was no need to worry, he was fine. The adventurers, hearing her name, asked loudly and with surprise, "Isn't she the leader of Team Twilight Sword?" Anna looked at her with admiring eyes and said that it was much better. He asked, by the way, did she just call him darling? She agreed and said, their shame was that they really were a couple. The secretaries were very. I was really surprised. You can approach them and say. He quietly apologized for the noise and they, confused, replied that. She said that everything was fine, smiled, and added she still had to deal with some matters. Matters that need to be done, so she apologized. Next it was Nuku's turn. He was serious and thought deeply. There should be no problems. Anne was terribly nervous during the conversation, then blushed and shyly whispered, "That's good." He came closer, called her, and said that these two were his good acquaintances. Surabhad leaned toward her and added that she apologized for not introducing herself immediately. She gave her name and said that she was the secretary of this guild. Another woman stood nearby, terribly nervous, and also introduced herself, explaining that she was sent from the Sherpa Guild to help. Bhikkhu also introduced herself and sincerely thanked them for taking care of her pet, assuring that she greatly appreciates their care. She asked in surprise how long they had been seeing each other, then smiled happily and said it was only a few days. But the confession was even earlier. First he confessed to her Anne, and she was glowing with happiness. She said it was so romantic the travelers froze in surprise, and her smile blossomed even happier. She smiled and said it happened twice. Her impression only grew, and she added that he was so stubborn. She was about to ask something else, but Sura called her and said she had received care. Enthralled, she turned to her and asked with a sparkle in her eyes, "Isn't it wonderful, Evina, to see how happy you are?" He laughed and said it was exactly the same, then suggested meeting later and having lunch together. She immediately agreed, adding that she would be glad to go. MC admitted that he regretted he caused so much trouble, even though there was so much work. Sura replied that it was okay, there was no need to apologize. He called and asked if it was time to leave, and she agreed. They headed to the exit. Waving to the secretaries, he said they would see each other again, and Han, with a face shining with happiness, turned and said she invited them to have dinner together. Let them ask them everything properly. A little confused, she agreed and said that now they should return to work. When they went outside, he called her by name. She addressed him as darling and asked what had happened. He also agreed and whispered that Tay called her husband that so. And she also called him that. He fell silent and pondered. She was talking about her maid. Really? Yuka smiled and said she was just a little over 40. She was no longer young, had raised many children, but she and her husband still loved each other as if they were newlyweds again. She taught her everything about love, that true lovers must always trust each other no matter what happens, and give themselves fully to the relationship when they are truly close. She believed that their love would have no end. That's what she thought. Honestly, she didn't listen very carefully to those endless talks about love. Still, she never thought she would ever have a beloved person. Now she regretted not listening more attentively. He glanced nervously and thought, good thing they didn't say darling when talking about each other. He couldn't imagine calling her that in front of everyone. It seemed she grew up in a rather unusual environment, logical and calm, yes, but when it came to the simplest things, that is knowledge and experience, she had almost none. She called him darling again and added that it was time to strengthen their bond. She reached out her hand to him and he wondered, did she really want to hold hands? That's exactly how he imagined it, but everything turned out differently. Ro called her by name. He called her name and asked what she was doing. Ivica turned to him and replied that it was called holding hands. He laughed and she asked if he was okay. He replied that everything was fine, he just thought it was very. Her style was the same. He believed that every couple was unique in its own way, but even despite the fact that even when she stumbled and got confused in the most ordinary little things, the most important thing was different. They felt happiness and satisfaction here. He asked. If they walked step by step, it would be easier. She agreed to try. Bari went out. He left the restaurant next to them and called him Pops, then said they would see each other later. He had the best meat and he gladly addressed her as young lady, saying that it was, of course, so. She has to come again. She noticed how they walked together and asked, why are they? They were nearby, and suddenly she noticed they were holding hands. And she shouted loudly from confusion. The thought in her head seemed crumpled. She pondered. She could not understand why they held hands so strangely and walked synchronously. She rushed to them, shouted to the princess, asked her to wait, but at that moment, the cat jumped on her chest and fixed its gaze on the meat she was holding. She apologized to the cat, said she was in a hurry, and then turned around. She turned to them and didn't even notice where they had disappeared to. This terribly unsettled her, and They continued on foot, and Ivka asked if this was the same clinic. The protagonist knocked on the door, agreed, and said that he just needed to ask the doctor something. It wouldn't take long. He went in, called Dr. Canope, introduced himself, and said he was coming in. He moved on, saw someone sleeping near a pile of empty alcohol bottles, and said that he realized the person was sleeping, tried to wake him up, and she got a little worried. He was gnawed by the thought how many bottles of alcohol were here, and he couldn't shake it off. He said it was in vain and immediately fainted. Then he called her and asked. It was a bit awkward to ask. That was the point, but could she cast the dark race drop spell on him? She agreed to it and smiled, saying it was no problem for her. She resorted to magic. He came to and, still surprised, asked if his head hurt. The alcohol was way too strong. MC asked if he had prepared the potion he requested. Kenobi objected, grabbed the bottle and handed it to him, saying, then at least ask him for a prescription, and he replied that he would wait a second. He will write it right now. He handed him the antidote prescription and warned, if he manages to sell it, don't forget to bring him even more alcohol. He agreed and sincerely thanked him. They left the clinic and she asked what kind of antidote it was. He replied that it was an antidote against the poison given to them by the boss from that floor last time, and added that this monster had probably already been added to the dungeon guide under the name Bomb Vine. He said that he gave the doctor several blackthorns and he was able to save them. He has a gift for analysis. If there is a source of poison, making an antidote for it is not a problem. Looking slightly displeased, she said she would never have thought he had such an incredible talent. He smiled and replied that he is a bit scary and always angry, incredibly overcharges and drinks right at work, but he is a master of magic. Everything he knew about pharmacology he learned from him. He can be trusted. After making a few copies of the antidote, he plans to sell it at the Adventurers Guild. So he was. While he was thinking about all this, saving her, Ro asked if it bothered her. She, with a slightly surprised expression, replied not at all, and that impressed her. As befits her beloved, they can raise the stakes. The antidotes will go with them on their next dive. Wonderful, right? He asked if they would go home after buying groceries. Okay, she agreed. Then she noticed a shop, called him and suggested going inside. He looked toward the shop. He stopped by the store and asked her if she wanted to go to the bookstore. She agreed and said she wanted to buy something. Later they returned home and Marie greeted them, to who said, welcome back. They approached her and Ivka took out a photo album, saying she had a gift for her. The gift was just for her. She took it, beaming with happiness, and sincerely thanked her. He said with a satisfied smile that she liked it. They entered the house and he said he would go prepare dinner and asked, can you read with me? She lit up with a smile and joyfully replied that he could count on her. As soon as he finished cooking, they immediately settled down to read. After a little silence, they went to eat. Marie. She tiredly squinted, rubbed her eyes, called her sister, and suggested going to sleep together. He called her and said it was time to return home. For a whole week he did not let her out of his arms, and Darling whispered that he did not want her to leave. Confused, he added that she could not stay here. Trust between adventurers and Sherpas is critically important, and if it again is not on his side, then others will turn away and stop trusting him. She still did not lose hope to stay in their house and whispered if she could at least say something. Stay here until she falls asleep, he apologized and explained. However, she was already asleep. She led her to bed and gently whispered good night. They went outside and he offered to escort her home, but she said that it was not worth it. He cannot leave Marie alone. He agreed and said that then they would see each other tomorrow. She She gave him a look as if something displeased her, and he immediately asked, "Is something wrong?" She said that the connections say, regardless of whether it is morning or night, when lovers part, they say goodbye to each other properly. He raised his eyes and thought, could it be that his words were not enough? So what is needed then? A thought flashed instantly in the hero's mind. He stepped closer. He asked embarrassedly if she could close her eyes. She did it. A deep embarrassment flashed on her face, and he, putting his hands on her shoulders, he thought that she was also looking at him. He had been silent for too long. Finally, he kissed her and wished her good night. A few days later, after a few days, they stepped into the dungeon again. Their second descent began, and soon they reached the 32nd floor. Bari pointed at him and whispered that she had seen everything. They moved strangely, as if something was urging them on. Like a miracle, they held hands right in the very center of the city. She would have believed it was a date. She resisted, called the Nuku Black Princess, and added that if she was in a relationship, it could cause problems. What will the temple master say when he finds out about this Yuika from? He smiled confidently and asked, "Let her finish," and then repeated once more, "Loved ones are people for whom only one thing matters, whether the feelings are mutual, right?" He and his beloved had already been through this, so there was no doubt they were definitely in love. It shocked them, and she loudly exclaimed that, although there were bad rumors about that guy, she heard them from the owner of the liquor store, and they still remember their demands to Sherpas, right? To pass, you must definitely have both experience and something truly impressive. This guy is really a great guide, but the trouble is exactly in their second requirement, their Sherpa. Sherpa must be at least level 5, and this guy is an ordinary mid-level traveler, level 7, and that was 4 years ago. However, they descended to the 14th floor by a shortcut known only to mid and high-ranking Sherpas, but he deliberately led them to the 13th, the one designated for beginners. There they wiped out all the monsters they could find, and he took all the experience and loot that dropped from that floor. Here's what, for beginners, adv. Usually adventurers don't do that, but he did it again and again, so they nicknamed him Floor Eater. Yuika turned around and asked if he had at least some reason. Really? He agreed and said that that was exactly the case. Yuika calmly replied that he couldn't do anything then. Nuku called her and said that she should think about. Her position is strong. She is a symbol of trust for Galactica, and all adventurers dream of being like her. If rumors spread that she is dating someone, it will only strengthen people's doubts. MC listened to him and thought, that's exactly how it will be. He said that once someone pretended to be her lover, and because of that, a bunch of gossip articles accumulated. The uproar arose not only among her fans, but also among the church hierarchy, guilds, and young ladies from blue families, and it even reached the members of Twilight Swords. The squad forbade her from going out in public, so she sharply turned to him and shouted indignantly at Darling that those articles were complete fabrications. He was the first man she had dated. Yuku snapped, grabbed him by the head, and said the problem was no longer about that. Now he, just in case, asked, is there a chance they would break up? Yuika firmly refused. And then he asked her to promise 3 things. First, never do anything in front of other people, even when this beloved is nearby. Second, she must not go on dates with him or sleep with him without his permission. Third, when they are in the dungeon, they should behave as is customary between a traveler and a Sherpa. She wanted to object, but he looked at her sternly, called her closer, and quietly said that he didn't know if Tai had already told her about this, but lovers do go on dates. That's normal, only everything must be done secretly. She whispered, slightly embarrassed that the city was full of people, and besides, the expensive one had a sister at home, so where, she asked, could they flirt? He and Bari grabbed their heads, and she shouted loudly that they didn't care. Mazakin laughed and said that young love is so beautiful, and just from those words his stomach already ached. Nuku called him over and asked him not to mock them. He replied that he had no humor at all. In the capital, he was probably a priest working for the Black Princess, but now they are both travelers, right? It's a dangerous job. Life can end at any moment, so why not let them do what they want? She angrily attacked the old man and shouted loudly that he shouldn't talk like that, when suddenly the wheel turned in another direction. He shouted to Eureka and loudly asked what they should do. She with SL. A slightly displeased expression appeared on her face. She replied that she understood everything and agreed to the terms, but would continue to call him darling as before. While they were here alone, everything remained unchanged. Bari was insanely annoyed by this. He called her and told her to focus on diving. After that, they could have. They continued exploring, and he thought, as last time in 2 days they reached the 43rd floor. Under her command now are 7 skeletons, 9 orcs, and 5 imps who know how to use. Using magical spells, she extended her hand forward with a serious expression right at the monsters in front of her. He stood before her and ordered her monsters to shoot ice arrows and the others too. They retreated and then reached the 46th floor, again got into a fight with monsters and encountered salamanders who had an innate gift for firearms. She used it. The gift of the phantom needle managed to catch 6 salamanders and whispered, "Wonderful, she will name them Saro." Sarah 16, Nuku called her and with a trembling voice said that he felt another monster is sneaking from the side. They need to manage to dodge. A fluffy giant in thick fur, the fur covers every inch of him. No physical attacks against him, simply work. He called sorry and said that they need to test their abilities. They should turn everything into a pile of ashes, rush the monster simultaneously. At the same time, she with a satisfied smile said that they have to need to focus their fire precisely on his flesh. He pressed the giant down with an avalanche of their attacks. Evza called him and asked, "What is this? Is this all he is capable of? He has no fighting spirit," and she began to laugh loudly. Loudly, Mazikun called that guy and asked if he was okay. His lips trembled. "So they are in love, aren't they?" The protagonist with a barely noticeable smile thought that it was. For a person, it was strange to get so excited during a fight with monsters. She jumped from the cliff where she was standing and said, she said that Sarah would probably fit in well in the upcoming battles. Of course, it's a pity that Nico and Menorin. And this time she is not going with them. She ordered the monsters to line up and coldly said that the list was good. They needed to reach the 48th floor. They had just gotten there. Here he decided that this floor had not yet been surveyed, but one mistake would be enough and everyone could be covered, without a doubt. Sherpa can do nothing here. He can only focus on creating map, and here they are at E4S24. Darksmith suddenly teleported behind them, laughed and said that he knew this. He found the guy from Girl with Braids. MC suddenly felt something, turned around and she noticed it. He did and asked, "Is something wrong with you?" and kept responding, constantly looking back. She looked at him cautiously and whispered, "Don't you feel like someone is watching you?" He was watching them, objected and coldly said that she felt nothing. Whatever happens, they still have to stay alert. He approached 2 orcs and decisively said that they would cover their backs. Nuku called his lover and said, "Ahead 3 huge monsters." When head, she smiled confidently, "She will handle them." They stepped into a wide open space. There was not a single monster around and therefore she said that she saw nothing, called him and asked if he was sure they were there. He agreed and wrote it down. Rose added quietly, "If that's the case, these monsters might have the gift of illusions or be able to masterfully camouflage." He put the backpack down on the ground. He crouched and listened intently. Somewhere above, muffled scratching or rustling was heard and it flashed through his mind, "If you look closely. The strangest thing, the moss glows only in certain places." He said that the monsters hide underground, most likely these are monsters that easily pass through any rock formations. Eureka thought it over and said she knows several monsters that fit this description. They are now on lower floors and each of them has their own vulnerable spots. First of all, understand exactly what you are dealing with. Nuku said that they needed bait. Fortunately, small and nimble salamanders happened to be nearby. She nodded, called Sarah 6 and sternly ordered, "He must run through the entire hall." Salamander dashed forward and immediately warned, "They will stay here. Sit here and wait until the enemy appears." She did not take her eyes off what was happening around. She noticed something stirring underground and suddenly saw and said, "It is approaching." The huge one. Worm crawled out from under the ground. And the main hero asked, "Is this Ovi?" "Ovian," she said, and seriousness froze on her face. "And these monsters are vulnerable to fire. Sarah needs to use the flamethrower," Nuku called her, and he said that the salamanders currently cannot move against 3 Ovians. They will become their first target. He raised his hand and said, "I have an idea. Each of them can grab a salamander thanks to Bari's sails and air magic. They will be able to move lightning fast and the salamanders will be able to use this spell without any problems, right?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. "Then they will become legs for the salamander." "Salamander's right," Sarah shouted and took it in her palm. Mazikin. Frowning with displeasure, he asked if he would also have to participate in this. Bari with an indignant expression. He loudly declared, "Of course I need to stop using levitation." Ivka called Darling and said, "He needs to hide here," she said. He nodded and agreed, and she ordered several monsters to guard. Delay him and turn other monsters into bait. They rushed forward, and she loudly shouted that the attack would begin as soon as the rest of the Ovians appeared. He watched all this from behind. He was sure Ovians, even among the rarest monsters, are some of the strongest. He hoped this strategy would work, and that it wouldn't. No one will get hurt. Others would already be fighting the monsters, and he decided, fire cannons are effective. Great, it's only a matter of time. He barely started to speak but didn't finish his thought. Suddenly a dark blacksmith flashed behind. He called him the guy with the tails, greeted him, and asked why he had so many things. He, just like that one, was making a delivery, or is there something else here? He turned to him, called out with slight surprise, and thought that he came just in time. Seeing that he was all right, it moved him. After these words, smiling, he said that the other was quite a decent person, and indeed it turned out that way. He looked at the monster guarding his path and asked, "Doesn't he understand that his friends below never respond?" He was so happy that he could finally talk to someone. "During a conversation you always need feedback, right?" he asked, clarifying if he meant exactly feedback. He fell to the ground and said that he actually knows a lot about the surface. He knows when Lady Pamela appears at a reception, she is unreally beautiful and has a gorgeous body, and also Sleepy's kebabs taste great with what is called ale. Isn't that so? He heard this with surprise and immediately wondered, did she really retire 7 years ago? He decided to join the game and said he knew quite a bit, but thought that this information was a bit outdated. The blacksmith pulled out a dagger, smiled, and said, "This is the dagger of memories. You strike with it, and you see the memories of the one you strike." He learned a lot. Those are the travelers who died in this dungeon. If the body is still fresh, their memories are still clear. He followed them, hoping that all would die. He wants to see their memories. MC quietly coughed, nodded thoughtfully, and asked if this dagger was the workshop's work. The other agreed, yes, it was made in the workshop on the 52nd floor. But he is only a courier. Whoever is behind this, the whole production is drawn into the game, both the administration and even fundraising. Among all these people, only he understood how best to use such things and called it cool. Cool, he thought, and realized there are only 4 dark smiths, the lowest floor of Tyro's dun. The dungeon is most likely hidden on the 52nd and 53rd floors. If there is a workshop on the 52nd, then the lowest is almost certainly the 53rd. On the lower floor, besides the boss himself, it is empty. All the monsters are on the 48th floor. It is easier to sort out the past when you know exactly how many floors there are. This monster is such a... He talks too much already. He wants to track how much information can be extracted from this, while the people are trying to completely clear the dungeon. While the monsters have their backs, the day will come when they will have to fight the dark smiths too. Don't close yourself off too much and don't lose vigilance. The blacksmith crawled even closer. Sharp thuds sounded nearby, and he asked what was happening there. Darling, Yuika called so she can come out. Ro went to them. The monster crouched behind his back, and he smiled and cheerfully assured as if everything was fine. Bari saw him and grabbed him. He snatched her weapon and loudly shouted that this was the very monster. Nuku approached and ordered her to wait, otherwise she could have injured him too. She must not forget he can teleport, otherwise they will end up the same as last time. Yuika tightly gripped the sword, shouted "Road," and asked what it meant. He answered quietly that he came across it just by hiding. It seems his workshop was on the 52nd floor. He seemed to be quite well oriented downstairs. At least he knew exactly where the oases were, Kovalov said in a confused tone. He smiled and said confidently, "Of course I know. I have been in every corner of this dungeon." Then he turned to Kovalov and asked with a smile, or by any chance, if he asks politely. He promised to show the path with the fewest monsters, introduced himself as the guy with braids, and asked if he would really ask. He happily replied that of course he would lead them on the way to the oasis. He thought and said that only the leader could later give him permission for this because there are plenty of monsters nearby. Yuika went around Kovalov, aimed a weapon at him, and said coldly that their road to the oasis would be faster if they could. She could use him as bait for the monsters, but Buri snorted. He would run away at the same moment, and even before she could apply the phantom needle on him. How to stop his teleportation? She screamed. Nuku replied that no demonic energy flows from him, so no enemy sensors work on him. The protagonist came closer, called him, and asked if he already feels his energy. He agreed and immediately asked what exactly the protagonist did. He slid them a thing and whispered that this pendant presence isolation hides his demonic energy. As soon as he said this, they no longer believed. Trust him until you feel the energy, and as soon as it touches their senses, he will immediately give it to the protagonist. He also gave him boots that he himself used for teleportation. Mazakin extended his hand and asked to give him these things for evaluation. Accepting them, he carefully examined and said that yes, the boots really have displacement cast, and the pendant does not arouse suspicion. Yuika, not believing his ears, asked. He told all this even when no one was controlling him. He agreed and replied that his goal was simply to talk to someone. If they understood him, he would tell them more. She asked if they could use this even without the phantom needle, and he replied that the chances were high. All but ultimately it was up to them to decide what to do. He agreed to anything. No decision, she thought it over and said they would do exactly as Darling said. He said Bari was surprised and asked the princess if she was quite sure, so she agreed and said they would be allowed to move freely. However, if any problems arose, it was clear in her eyes she would say dear. An MC came to the blacksmith and said they had been given permission, which pleased him greatly. It happened, but she approached him, called him a monster, and sharply said he was celebrating too early. They had conditions under which he could continue. Talk to the guy with braids. At first he would do what she said like a real leader. He agreed. He replied and she strictly ordered him to call her ma'am. He agreed. Then she said there was also a second thing. He absolutely cannot attack all party members the same way as the monsters she controls. Thirdly, no lies. If he breaks even one condition, he will not be able to. He will never speak to the boy with braids again. Understood. He straightened up, agreed to these terms, and she said, all right, from now on his name is Skull Mask. Rose stood nearby, smiling, and said it was time to head to the oasis. He agreed, pointed in the right direction, and confirmed once again that this was where they should go. Mazakin looked at this and said, he is just leading the monster by the nose like that. This guy is incredible. Nuku agreed and added that if he ever became their enemy, he would probably be the most terrifying of all they had ever met. He decided to set out on a journey with a smart monster, something that had never happened to him before, and not only with Twilight Sword. In the entire history of travelers, nothing like this had happened. A skull mask and a monster who really wanted to talk. Such a monster should not exist, so they had to be cautious. Hard, Eureka said they needed to leave immediately. He must lead them to the nearest oasis. Hard politely agreed and pointed them in the direction. Ari looked away and asked, what about that huge passage? He said was both a hole and a path. But it is not a path. The Avioni left their tracks everywhere. He tried to pass through somehow, but in the end got stuck in circles again. When he finally got out, it turned out he was where he started. If a person gets lost in this place, most likely they will just die. The real path is this crevice. Mazuakin snorted with laughter and said to the newcomers, it seems fatal, but if you don't know about it, it's easy to pass by. The protagonist marked it on the map and he climbed into the crevice and warned them to be careful. It was quite tight there. Eureka said she would send Sarah ahead to light up. That way, she called Darling and asked what he thought. Could they pass here? He agreed and replied that they could. He walked along the crack and thought, this structure is too unusual for a dungeon. If the passage is so narrow, even monsters wouldn't take this path. Nuku called Lady Black Princess and she said that the orcs were stuck. She called them and ordered them to enter slowly one by one. Skull Mask named the boy with braids and whispered that the exit was here. She called him. He got out of the gorge and with relief in his voice told the others that he already saw the exit. Then he asked if there was an oasis nearby. He stood next to him. Someone said that they were already a bit ahead. He was struck by what he saw there and joy spread inside him. Happy Berry nodded joyfully but bumped into his backpack. She looked a little displeased and said that the luggage was blocking the passage. From what she saw, she loudly called the princess and exclaimed, it must be just a nightmare. We need to go out and look. Ivica climbed out of the crevice. Travis called Darling and asked what had happened here. He called her by name and ordered her to look ahead. There was a cliff ahead. She asked indignantly, what does this mean? She wanted to add something else, but the worried blacksmith interrupted her and assured her that he was not lying. The road stretched endlessly. He noticed a path beside the cliff and asked if that was the one meant. They nodded and he said he had been there many times. Bari asked how he crossed that chasm. He smiled and replied that it was simple thanks to moving boots. It was incredibly easy, and MS lifted his boots and declared that now they were his. Now he was filled with terrible anger and promised to give him sandals. Yuika asked if her demons could carry them one by one. Flying demons picked up one orc and Nuku calmly said that it was supposed to work that way. Skull Mask beamed with joy and, unable to contain her surprise, asked if she was an angel incarnate. He smiled and replied that she was exaggerating. By the way, how did he know this word angel? She called two monsters. Orders told them to carry the orcs and assured that the rest would follow them. He glanced aside and thought, you can't get there if you don't know how to fly. He had never seen anything like it, not even on maps. What should we call it, this path? Bridge for the air, maybe it should be marked with some symbol. He glanced down and whispered that down there swarmed a whole swarm of blood cockroaches. Bari. The monsters carried him, chased after, and he got scared, said they should try not to look there. There she seemed terribly frightened and said she needed to be moved quickly. Yuyuko was taken to them. There she called her and asked how she was feeling. They hadn't moved everyone yet, but they needed to keep going. She called her and They said 5 flying monsters, and after they moved the monsters one by one, let them follow them. They went further and saw many. He gestured towards many different passages and explained they needed the second cave on the right. Ro asked if these paths were really all different. If receiving a positive answer, he immediately started noting it on the map and thought, with so many passages, the next group of travelers will have a really hard time even with a map. Skull Mask rushed forward and said, "That's where we need to go." He thanked him and immediately added that he had helped them a lot. He laughed and suddenly caught himself thinking, it seems he is a special person. He smiled, thanked for the compliment, and with a glow on his face, asked if he could keep these sandals. He allowed it with a smile and said, "Let it be a sign of gratitude and proof of truth." To confirm their friendship, Yuika coughed to get attention and said they needed to go down and rest. He offered to make tea. She agreed and then thanked him. And he brewed the tea, brought it to the others and said. He smiled and said that now he would eat fruits and even have them as a snack. She was a bit sour but still very incredibly tasty. He approached the rest of the team and also treated them. And they sincerely thanked him for it. He turned to Skull Mask and said that he already had it for him too. He jumped up with joy and said that he really was a very good person. He took it in his hands, shining with admiration, looked at the dried fruits and asked, "Does this mean that people eat them?" He shuddered with surprise. The taste was incredible, and the main character just laughed and threw out that he needed to eat slower, well, so that no one chokes. Bari noticed how the princess frowned displeased, immediately asked what happened, and Yueka with a serious face replied that they needed to act according to the plan. He called the whole team and asked if they could come here. He agreed. She called Skull Mask and sharply ordered him to stay there and sit quietly. When everyone gathered around her, she addressed Darling. It could safely be assumed that the lowest floor of the dungeon is the 53rd, right? He agreed and said that most likely yes. She moved closer and informed, now they are on the 48th floor and the next target is the 50th basement. As soon as they found the bypass, they immediately managed to get to the surface. Bari looked at them with envy and asked how much longer they would have to drag this monster. She looked at him and replied that they were insanely lucky they did not get lost and managed to take the bypass, and Bari would like her to lead them all the way to the end of the route. Nuku covered his face with his hand and grimaced with displeasure, and Mazukin, chewing fruit, said that here, it seems, a bittersweet love triangle is emerging. He called Nuku and politely asked not to say too much. Yueka called Darling and asked if he could interrogate him about the next step, and MC agreed and whispered that he was already sure that he had finally figured out how to deal with him. By the way, he also wanted to ask him about monsters. He was certain they would encounter creatures not yet in the monster guide, and there was still a chance that a floor boss awaited them. Nuku asked in surprise if he wanted to talk with him about bosses too. He smiled and replied that he understood it could be dangerous, so he would try to ask carefully so that he wouldn't suspect anything. She turned to him and looking anxiously asked, "Of course it was wonderful, but wasn't he getting too close? Even if acting with good intentions, he behaved too friendly with him. He must remember this, he was a monster and an enemy for some reason." Her heart tightened from that closeness. He looked a bit confused and said he understood her. Ari was stunned. For the first time she realized the princess was jealous and had called her. Mazukin, sipping tea, declared that this could be considered advice from the leader. Isn't that incredibly funny? Eureka stood up and decisively, and with a slight smile, said that they had rested well, they could continue. She called Skullmaskin and he replied that they needed to go down even further. Let him show them the shortest path. He agreed and asked if there would be even tastier food there. Ro looked at him through a smile and said, "Maybe that's how it will be." He agreed and said, "Then let's not waste time." He led them to the slope, laughed and he said that being together with adventurers is pure pleasure. He walked alongside, looked around and asked if he was strolling with his comrades. Dark blacksmiths, he did not know enough, so he would just make a sketch. The blacksmith contradicted what he said earlier and said that he invited. But no one answered. He looked at him and asked, "By the way, he speaks their language well, but he has no one to talk to. Is it true the local monsters also do not respond to him?" He agreed and said that they are silent, but one of them sang and even cast a spell. So they definitely must understand the language, so he constantly tries to talk to them, and the thought of singing does not leave him. Obviously, they must be a level higher. Level monsters, they can put meaning into words. Maybe these are floor bosses after all. He looked around, you noticed it, and nodded to him. He quietly said that he sincerely worries about his friends. What class are they? Skullmask stepped forward and admitted that he does not know at all. All the monster names he remembered came to him from the foreign memories of people who died in the dungeon. dungeon, he stepped into something liquid and Nuku was called by Lady Black Princess. She said that a monster appeared behind them. She asked for only one monster. For the lower floors, this is an extremely rare case. The protagonist heard the rumble of a boulder rolling and at that moment understood, only the monster that came alone appears on the floor. He sharply turned to them and shouted loudly, "This is a killing ball. If it touches them, they will be destroyed." Warning, the killing ball is rolling, filling the entire dungeon corridor and destroying everything in its path. They covered everything that happened on the way, rushing forward at full speed. Skull Mask instantly asked. So what he stepped on earlier turned out to be the same crushed monster they had just talked about. Noticing that the passage branched, he sternly told everyone, "We need to go right." Blacksmith was stunned and he loudly declared that this passage was wider. The ball would fit there without any problems. He said this decisively and confidently, "Everything will be fine." They had to dash into this passage and they succeeded. The ball rolled behind and the wheel of the process was already turning. Behind them it turned left. Bari noticed this and asked, "But why did it turn there?" He said that there were reports of people dying were coming in and a memory surfaced. One of the oldest guides said that the group managed to survive, they just chose the wider passage. Skull Mask shouted excitedly to him and blurted out that he knew so much. Even he, the monster, did not suspect this, but this was expected from his friend. Ivica laughed, her smile glowing with pleasure, and she teased, "Isn't he incredible? After all, he is F. She is his dear one." Bari was shocked by what happened and wondered if she was competing with Ammon. The monster, a giant creature, crawled beside them, a sign that the carnival on the untrodden floor had quietly already begun. F. He followed after them. Later she called him and said that the enemy was. It was already approaching. Both needed to hide somewhere. He quietly agreed. They moved to where there was more. Mazakin and MC asked if he had ever seen them fight, but in response they heard a denial. He said it was better for him to close his eyes for a monster like him. He could have stunned the slime man crawled towards them. Their special ability is physical endurance, pulsing in every member of this species. Nuku shifted his gaze to that giant monster and said he felt the presence of Seven. She was standing nearby. He added shortly and sharply, it meant one thing: they had merged into one. Seven called 5 of the Saris and ordered them to climb the hill. The slime mass bursts into flames from all sides. Slime monsters hold the fire only until it crumbles into dust. He sharply turned and loudly warned, 3 more monsters are sneaking from the opposite side. Seven called all the orcs and ordered them to cover from the rear. 3 minotaurs emerged from the darkness. She laughed and said it was wonderful. They must. It was necessary to strike what stood ahead. She swiftly cut through the group of skeletons to attack the monsters from the flank, called Bari, and said she should use magic to immobilize the slime man. He called 2 flying monsters and ordered them to obey her command. She ordered 2 more monsters to obey Nuku's commands and said that he must provide. He agreed to support the orcs and skeletons, and with a confident smile she drew her sword and he said they needed to put an end to the carnival. At that moment, the frightened Skull Mask turned to the boy with pigtails awkwardly asked if he could be pushed in the shoulder. When will he be able to open his? He opened his eyes, something pushed him in the shoulder, and he quietly asked if this was really the end. Ready, and he opened his eyes. He got even more scared when he saw that it was the head of an orc and loudly exclaimed that this was what hit him. He immediately fainted. Mazakun confirmed this and Rose said that it was Ev. He felt even better like this. He grabbed a notebook and began to think about how to describe the course of the battle. He wrote down. The fire of the salamander cut through the slugs and Bari, with the help of an imp, immobilized one of them. All 7 were caught by the phantom needle. The minotaurs still held formation, but the slow slime suddenly exploded with energy. Yuika shouted from the po. Then Puyo counted from 1 to 7 and shouted for them to hold on. She must hold the minotaur, grab its tentacles. The slimes instantly obeyed her. She dived inside and snatched the minotaur. She rushed straight at them. She used the skill Phantom Needle, and just then he said that all monsters must line up. She cast a healing spell on them, and finally she had as many as 3 salamanders, 7 slimes, and 3 minotaurs. Even 1 imp was under her control. She looked at them with. He looked focused and said that the offensive power was weak. He suggested they move on and immediately called Darley. He asked what happened to Skull Mask. He held it with one hand and whispered that he was about to faint, asked for a moment to recover, and offered them a snack. As soon as he heard this, he immediately came to his senses. He stood up and cheerfully said that he also wanted to eat. The protagonist smiled and replied that first they would reach the oasis on the 49th. 9th floor. All right. Nuku looked at this with a confused expression and thought that it looked like he was holding him on a short leash. Then they set up camp near the oasis, and while resting and treating wounds they actually managed to pull out the garrison and one skeleton knight with the gift of explosion. After that they finally reached the finish point of the descent, the 50th floor, went ahead and thought that the level of the Twilight Sword Squad was on the 12th. And for this place they recommend level 16. Although they conserve energy, fatigue quickly builds up. It seems they should prepare something. On the next run something light, but they still need to prepare health and mind. Ocean, the skull mask, exclaimed with slight surprise. It touched him and he asked, "What happened?" Did they get lost? He waved it off and said that this place seemed familiar to him when he came to visit his friend. He often teleported to the nearest place. At first he just didn't notice because he appeared here too abruptly. This attracted Eweek's attention, so MC asked, "Does this mean his friend is nearby?" He answered, "Usually yes, but not always. He is quite gloomy but so gigantic that you can't miss him, and their faces are somewhat similar." He was momentarily confused and thought that this was nothing like what he had known about his face until now. The face was still hidden under the mask. They entered a large empty cave. And Skull Mask said that he was ultimately not here. Usually he talks to him right here. He looked around and thought that it was terribly dark here. It is dark here, and when the clatter of horse hooves sounded, he was so frightened that he shouted loudly, "So they will be here soon. What should they do?" And he was surprised by his own reaction, so he asked, "They are friends, aren't they?" He loudly objected and declared that they were old enemies. Once they tore out and ate his hair, and that hair was extremely precious to him. He got it from dead people he found in the dungeon. And he attached it here, one hair at a time. It took an incredibly long time. He does not want to go through that again, so he started to run away, said goodbye to them, and Ro asked to wait, saying he forgot. He lost his boots, so everything is decided. He himself said he had fun, so he can leave it. And after all, it's cursed. Someday they will see each other again, but next time they might meet as enemies. After all, monsters exist to protect the dungeon. Yuika noticed that Skull Mask ran away and, glancing fearfully, asked Nuku how many enemies were coming here. He answered, 13 of them. They were approaching from the front. They seemed to be moving as a group. She called out to Buyu and said that they needed to form a defensive formation, shoulder to shoulder. The slimes tightly closed into a wall, and she loudly called Minoran so that they let them prepare their spears and the geese cover their backs. Isuken Sarah must protect her dear child. In Mazukin, the thunder of hooves rolled forward and grew louder and louder. Suddenly, they heard the loud scream of those monsters. Protagonists saw those monsters and, stunned, said that they were by. If they stab their horns into you, the wound will rot until they die. She died with a stone expression on her face. She rushed to Bio and sharply called him. He ordered her to block their way, and the monsters crashed into the slugs. And those began to devour them. Iviko calmly approached them. He came closer and said that in defense, they are much more useful than she thought. She so easily caught a whole pack of monsters and used Phantom Muti. He aimed with needle skill at them and said, "My name is Yagi-1." He continued to use his skill on the monsters and gave each a different name. After this, she ordered them to line up and Barry called her. She suddenly asked if they looked more like horses. Nuku called the mistress and said that they ahead were 6 more enemies. They turned around and MC said that these were skeletons, but they didn't even have anything, no armor, no weapons. She smiled and said that it happened just in time. They could try Yagi just on them. She gave the order to attack the skeletons and they dealt with them without any difficulties. He called her again and warned 6 more monsters ahead. He was a little surprised that he saw this and thought, these are more skeletons. There were many of them. No weapons, is this their territory or something like that? A few more times 6 skeletons appeared to them, and she dealt with them with the help of monsters. A little confused, Yuko asked, "What is happening?" It's like they were walking straight to death. Above Yahai, a magical circle appeared in the Yagi. It immediately caught their eye. This magical circle tore apart the dark energy. Circle, and it loudly gave the command, "Booyah." Leo instantly dropped into a defensive stance, dancing, and suddenly everyone heard a very loud noise. A rumble at which they instantly covered their ears. Rue even trembled with surprise. What kind of sound was that? She called out loudly. He reached Yagi, ordered them to flee from there, and just as the dark magic entered, the energy disappeared and she felt it with surprise. First, Bari noticed that Yagi had disappeared, and then something else. Rue pointed upward and asked, "Something from above?" And he asked to look at it. Suddenly, everyone's chests tightened as if something pressed so hard that it took their breath away. They were squeezing their hearts, and those took away all their common sense with them. As if their heads refused to think, suddenly, a huge skeleton appeared. It suddenly emerged next to them and, uttering a spell that opens the gates to the underworld, firmly established its presence. He looked at it and realized that he felt only fear. It was King of the Dead, born in despair. Isn't that the coolest rank? The undead, a monster of the highest rank. Mazakin was F. He was the first to overcome his fear and immediately cast a spell. Moonblade spell. The boss of the 50th floor just cast it. He sharply uttered a counterspell against the bell and deflected its attack. He glanced at it. He said this with a serious expression and assured, "This means he can reflect his thoughts." "Reflect magical attacks," he shouted, and his spell whirled from its place and flew towards. A strike on the ceiling thundered like a signal. The battle begins. They instantly came to their senses, grabbed their weapons, and rushed to the prepared positions to continue acting. She shifted into combat stances, and Ivica loudly shouted that Minoran 1 and Minoran 2 must. It is necessary to deal with the skeletons and hold the last one in reserve. Uya 1 must break through the darkness in 7, all the way to the king himself. The protagonist pulled something out of his backpack and shouted, "Mazikun." He said that these mono elixirs must be used, grabbed them without hesitation, and attached them to his. He took out his belt, barely smiled, and said that it seems he will have to participate in F. Finally, curiosity overcame him. He called Black Princess and decisively said he would try to attack them with his magic and asked to borrow the support of the Minotaur. She agreed and said that G from 1. No more than 4 should remain in reserve and wait there. Darling must stay behind. He agreed and asked everyone to be careful. She agreed and rushed forward. He rushed forward and named Nuka, Barry, and Nisuk in her honor. They dashed past the Minotaurs who were fought skeletons, rushed forward to the boss end. Suddenly he opened the gate. Read again, gate to the underworld spell, and summon the skeletons again. She noticed it and called Nisagate. He ordered her deal with them. They joined forces and defeated the group. The pack of skeletons did not stop and continued breaking through the obstacles. King of the Dead clapped his hands and cast the spell Funeral Prayer. He released a powerful sound wave and it immediately overwhelmed them. They pressed their hands to their ears and cannot move. The boss started using drains. Because of this, Mazakin was terribly worried. Elbley said, "This is very bad. It was a real attack on the very soul. If it had hit them, their souls would have simply extinguished. Need to dodge." Everyone barely turned away this attack. The attack and the dark energy released by the monster instantly disappears. Don Yuhiko loudly called Bri and said the enemy is already standing behind her. It stunned her and she instantly rushed into an attack with a dagger, but Skeleton caught the blow with its teeth and grabbed her by the head. She did not waste time, immediately called Sarah and ordered her to extend a helping hand to her. The salamander ran up to her and he jumped to her and with one flash of flame incinerated the monster. We sincerely thanked the princess for this and said that she would use the psalm. Salamander like then from the Ovians she agreed and ordered them to obey her commands. She turned around and they loudly announced they needed to destroy one of the king's hands. Their sole task was to focus precisely on this attack. Everyone instantly agreed and MC glanced and thought, because of the funeral prayer and withering, everything was about to break down. 2 attacks together, too dangerous. If only they weren't hitting from afar. They could be hit by an attack that wiped out all the Bichorns. Even if they managed to get close to him, he defends himself with an army of skeletons he summons. If only they could find some gap in him, in his defense. Nuku with a serious face rushed forward together with his squire and used the skill throw. The King of the Dead cast the spell Cotter Bell and, noticing this, thought with a surprised face that not only magic could be reflected this way. Logic in the head and also physical attacks. Yuyuka loudly declared that maybe he wouldn't be able to block everything in a row. At the same time, they must attack without stopping. Agreed, he prepared to use a shooting technique and Bari suddenly flew behind the boss. In a sharp voice she ordered the salamander to immediately prepare to use the fire weapons. As soon as the order was given, the plan instantly formed into a single strike. Simultaneously from different sides, they rushed into the attack. Time slipped through his fingers and the boss did not let him use the spell. The boss roared fiercely in pain. Pain tore a scream from her. She called Nisagate and ordered him to use it. Clench the explosion in his hand right now. The boss called him his own and strictly ordered obedience. Obey him. He fell to his knees, could not move, and she shouted to him from. He looked confused and asked, "What is wrong with him?" "He has. Get up and attack the king." He threw his sword. He stuck the sword into the ground and sharply grabbed her by the throat. She responded in kind. She did not wait. Everyone was even worried. He became anxious, so she called out to him and asked. He begged to be released and begged again. He was asked why he no longer obeys. This worried him and he wondered, could the king? He could actually command even the skeletal knights. She shouted Bio 7 and gave the order. They needed to grab him. The disgusting sludge quickly crawled to him. They grabbed him and he let her go. He only exhaled when everything had already happened and said that the combat power faltered, but unfortunately, it was inevitable. She summoned Buyo from the first to the sixth and whispered that they must continue. Inui creeps through the darkness and immobilizes the king with his tentacles. He cast the gate spell to enter the underworld. Worlds, she grumbled discontentedly and added that he had called them even more. There were countless skeletons, no end in sight, and the king of the dead was about to cast a spell. Rain and Bari jumped forward, lunged at him, and said to the salamander, "An attack with magic," but the boss himself attacks with magic. He struck her with his tail and with incredible force threw her to the ground. They were torn apart from the inside and she finally called. He called the monsters and ordered them to take care of the skeletons. He continued to summon skeletons and magic and created. He cast a magic circle right under this monster and activated it. Spell high explosive cannon. He released an incredibly powerful burst of energy. When the dust settled, he exclaimed with surprise. Surprise he managed to avoid. He is indeed quite clever for size, isn't that so? In any case, it seems he did. He did not come out of there unscathed. Both Limus and the king's spine were slightly broken, so he used the funeral prayer spell. She was gripped by anxiety, and she loudly warned the others about another one. Another wave was approaching. The protagonist watched from the side and only when he realized the fight was dragging on did an idea suddenly flash in his mind. The usual tactics simply won't work here. Eriko shouted loudly that they needed to get rid of him. At first with hand movements, she rushed at the skeletons approaching them. He shouted science and he understood her and promised he would not allow him. He managed to cast only one spell. Bari jumped out after him and dived into the shadow. Behind him, they shouted loudly again that he had been drawn. He ordered to draw magical circles and only after that. I handed it to the salamander so that Matt could use it. Magic, and he did just that. He struck with a spell, but the limousine still arrived. King was still using the spell Swamp of Darkness. Suddenly, a magical circle flared up under her feet. For skeletons, she noticed this and said, "We need to run away from the magical circle." Everyone scattered, but one did not make it in time. And instantly, it was as if he was sucked in by magic. MC notices this. He felt it and decided he was dragged into the mud. He calmly watched all this and thought it was wonderful. All three of them did achieve success. The boss cast a spell through the downpour and she shouted loudly at G4 and gave the order. Tell him cast the blizzard spell and stop him. To him, the skeleton did so and he succeeded, and even a bear. From a great distance, Bari held a salamander in her hands, the very ones with which she created magic. The king of the dead dodged. Yuka saw this attack and pondered. Did he really start predicting their attacks? He called towards G4 and grimly ordered to continue acting. He ordered him to use this spell once more. He called her and ordered to use the spell Fire Cannon. The monster dodged the attack lightning fast again. He smiled and said, "That was good." It was incredible. Everything happened exactly as she had planned. The end. Someone sharply grabbed the sharp edge of the boss's mantle and it instantly slipped off like a rag. Slime slipped by nearby. It confused her. She, surprised by what happened, said she understood everything and he was very. She forced him to come closer step by step, very slowly, as if time had stopped. She loudly called Mazakin. He immediately understood everything. Use the spell Moon Blade. Just say to the monster, "What are you?" Use the counterspell compound to reflect the spell. But he used duplicate skill and launched it. One more spell. This is a gift that allows you to instantly copy any spell as soon as it is used. He used it, but the price was severe, twice as much mana. His strike hit and he managed to cut off two monsters. They were overwhelmed with joy at what had happened. He swallowed a mana potion and turned to him only two. Took only 2 hands, right? Nothing, no problem. Ro was watching from cover. He covered it and immediately thought, in such a short time, using counterbell twice won't work. He instantly understood and immediately used it. Now the twilight was on his side. The lightsaber flickered on the side and the slime had the gift of physical resistance, so its grip was almost impossible to weaken. Yueka loudly commanded Menoran 3 to move forward and ordered to continue the attack. The boss cast a draining spell and he was watching from afar and thought that it didn't look like a direct attack. He loudly called G1 and 3 and she ordered them, protect her. G and Nuku managed to hide behind the monsters and survived the attack. Attack only when you hit, with such a serious face. She sternly ordered him to take the sledgehammer and said that they just have to use it as a shield. Good thing Menoran 3 wasn't hurt. Now he will have to destroy the right hands of this monster. Minotaur rushed at him. He sharply clapped his hands. He tied his hands, after which he cast the burial prayer spell. Magical energy hit the monster, breaking the moment of silence with the roar of the strike. It left several wounds on his body. They immediately began to darken. He rushed closer and swung the axe. The barefoot man cast the drain spell and hit himself on the head with it. Ivka shouted loudly and ordered him to attack his right hand. The eyes instantly flare up, and the whole body tensed, muscles clenched for F. For the final attack, the Minotaur cut off his own hand. It seems the hand, but it suddenly snatched it behind the head. He tore it off completely, and Bari froze in surprise. He whispered that the Minotaur was dead. He said. Ivka calmly nodded in agreement and replied, "It is a great loss, but we had to take another hand." The protagonist watched this with a serious expression. She decided her monsters are fearless no matter how wildly the enemies attacked. They could not disobey and retreat, so they rushed into the attack, and the King of the Dead used the gate. The oath gate to the underworld worked, and the creature began to regrow its hand. It screamed loudly and called out. He shouted G4 and ordered to freeze that hand. The other obeyed without question. Mazakin cast the spell Earthen Fortress and created a huge behind an icy cliff, so there was nowhere to escape. Yuku looked and felt this was the perfect moment to launch an attack. He instantly used a throwing skill and hit exactly his hand. One of those hands was on the edge. The crack, Bari drew his daggers and rushed straight at this monster. The monster seemed to sense the threat. It promised to tear this thing apart. He used the edge's gift. The blade cuts everything it touches. He touched and cut off the fourth hand and the mutilated mother. Monster cast the spell Swamp of Darkness. He drew a magic circle under Yuika. She suddenly jumped back. Ludovico sharply ordered Gi4 to run away. Gi4 rushed to flee from there but could not. Black magical energy instantly engulfed him. Aiki glanced at the monster and loudly called the mistress. He whispered, "Slizan underwater drain. MC, did you notice that?" He thought almost all the monsters had already fallen. Yuika used the jump skill and dashed upward at a wildly high speed. This is a gift that temporarily grants strength and works precisely in this battle. In battle, only a single fraction of a second decides, will his sword strike in time? Attack first or the king's hand, but at that moment on the last second, a smile flashed across her face. He thrust the sword into the eye socket of the King of the Dead. Barely had he managed to use magic when the phantom needle struck sharply, without any warning. The gift needle immediately stopped him in his tracks. She sharply drew the sword and said that from now on his name was Mrs. Litz. She landed on the ground and resolutely declared that the ruler of the Shadow Kingdom must obey her. Nuku said that this is the boss from the 50th floor, and now she finally got him in the photo. Everything it looked terrible. Yuika agreed and said that for him they had lost a total of 26 monsters. Only Niske, Buyo, and Sarah remained, and she decided to replenish their ranks. First they need to rest. She will set them on guard. And Darling also has to prepare the potion. He agreed. Lower your gaze and look outside. Is the floor moving? She asked. Everyone stared in surprise, and she loudly added, "So are they enemies again?" And Bari asked in surprise, "Why is the floor shaking so much?" Rose replied that it seemed like the floor was changing. A rare anomaly that happens once every few years suddenly made itself known. The floor began to collapse right beneath their feet. And the worried Evrika loudly exclaimed, "This will separate them. They need to stay as close to each other as possible." He and Bari began to fall down. With anxiety in her voice, she called the princess. He was already about to call her, and she, noticing this, shouted. He shouted at them so loudly that he was about to use the gift and promised that to save them, but the ground between them rose by as much as 7 steps. Separate them, and suddenly they noticed that the passage was already narrowing, and she was terribly worried about what would happen next. He did not remain silent about it, and immediately called to. At the same time she fainted. At that very moment thought, she is seeing the same dream again. In difficult times, her thoughts seemed to reach out to the past team, to the one that was. She was destroyed. The one who saved her in that difficult moment is called Yuika. If they leave the labyrinths as they are, then all the light will be infected by magic and fall into darkness, so to save it they will have to clear all the dungeons. When she spoke about this absurd plan, such a light flashed in her eyes, brighter than anyone else's. In this world, she dreamed that her gaze would shine just as dazzlingly, and she wanted to be close. Stay with her longer than anyone and support her more than anyone. The princess was the only and first person who gave her hope. That was her light. She came to her senses. The protagonist called her and said. Finally she opened her eyes, but immediately hid them under her palm. He jerked his hands and sternly ordered him, "Turn off this lamp right now." She sat up sharply and with indignation in her voice asked if he wanted to burn her or something like that. He said he looked around a bit. It seemed this passage was formed by a collapse and there was apparently nothing extra hiding there. It stretches straight without branches or arenas. There are no monsters nearby yet. She tied her hair. And with a serious face he said, "They need to find the princess. She must be somewhere nearby." He looked at her and said that moving somewhere without thinking is dangerous. She was about to object. But he threw, she has to think about how they were separated. It seemed Eureka and the rest were sticking together. A skeleton knight stood near them, but he did nothing. This indicated that her phantom needle was still working. Bari T. Harry pondered and, barely smiling, said that it seemed he was right. As long as Nuku was nearby, they walked much more safely than they ever could without him. He suggested to believe in them and wait here. He handed her a vial of restorative potion and he asked her to drink. After that, without hesitation, he went straight to the monster standing nearby. I said that the skeleton knight lost his left arm and shield, but was still standing. Suddenly he drew his sword. She began drinking the potion and swallowing through him, carefree. She trembled as soon as she heard everything. A loud sound rang out and she immediately started coughing. She turned that way, already wanting to ask something. But he gripped the sword in his hands and said what he thought. This sword might come in handy. Power. To hold it with both hands, you need 35 strength points, and he fervently hopes that it is not cursed. He stuck the sword into the rock and it loudly asked, "What does it do?" asked the MC. He had heard rumors, supposedly after collapses. The walls and floor are incredibly soft, too much so. For now, they cannot take advantage of this. Everything crumbles too easily. However, when it hardens, this span will come in handy if something happens. He invited her to sit and briefly and seriously explained that they needed to discuss tactics. Even if only temporarily, they are one side if monsters appear. So the fight is unavoidable. It's time to discuss stats and gifts. He is a level 7 traveler, a heavy warrior, and his gift is stamina recovery. The 4th class, she said with surprise that despite everything, the highest class is the 3rd. Relying on travelers and the Galactica Guild Church, he agreed and said. He asked to keep it secret because he had never told anyone about this before. She knows that when leveling up, you can choose between a gift and stats, just not at the first level when he received stamina recovery. Each time he gains strength, so now he already has 31 strength points, and if measured only by this, he can compete with high-level adventurers. She slapped herself in the face with disgust and thought he is a real idiot. She needs to pull herself together. She is level 11, he called. He called her and said that she also has to tell him about her abilities, all for survival and to reunite with Yuika again. Suddenly, with a gloomy look and obvious hesitation, he said that there was nothing to be done anymore. About this, her story, he said, if they together encounter 5 monsters, they will not win, but he already had a plan on how to pull it off. He asked her to cast Wind Dance on his hands, a support magic that instantly enhances strength, right, if she can. She will be able to strengthen his hands, then her power will be enough for him to hold this broadsword. Bari asked with a tremor in his voice. He has 31 strength points and the requirements for the broadsword are 35, aren't they? If he doesn't reach the end, he will get tired almost immediately. The memory of his gift suddenly flared up in her, and he said he would take the role in the tank, so she needed to hold on to his back and launch an attack as soon as she notices the right opportunity. He bet his life on her, gave her his trust, was impressed, agreed, and he read it, asked again, all right, let it be so. It works both ways, right? They have already been informed. As if she heard something, she quieted down and quietly asked, it takes a little time, right? This is the Minotaur. Ro fixed his gaze on the beast and sharply asked, is it just me, or did he really look angry? He gripped the sword in his hands even tighter. And the monster roared loudly. It lunged at them and swung the axe. It struck terribly hard with its weapon. It threw her back from the strong gusts of wind. She suddenly sat down and she decided that it was just a shock front, but she felt it cannot be. Are they even capable of standing against such a monster? But as soon as the dust settled, she suddenly saw he is holding. He repelled the monster's attack with a sword. He asked with surprise, did he withstand the Minotaur? Colossal strength allowed him to continue restraining the monster. He continuously blocked its attacks. Repelling the monster's attacks, he sharply turned around. Bree shouted loudly. He immediately regained consciousness. Jumped to the Minotaur and again used Gift of Edge. She stabbed the dagger into the Minotaur's hand, and for a moment everything froze. He looked tense and wondered if that was all the strength the strike had. How strong were his muscles? The protagonist called her and said, you did it. If only she had attacked exactly at that spot. She agreed, and he continued to fend off all the Minotaur's attacks. He waited for the right moment and rushed forward too. The monster again launched an attack with the dagger. Relying on her gift, she immediately dashed aside and thought wonderful, this time the cuts were deeper. She flinched. He jumped after him, and together with him, their cooperation became stronger. With each moment, the fight with the Minotaur increasingly turned into a war of attrition. The monster let out a loud, furious roar. Bari said, it seems it has gone crazy. Minotaur suddenly began attacking much more actively from his. He struck with an axe, blocked his path, and sharply pulled himself. I warned her the force was too great. Hard blows and the blade of his sword suddenly shifts. Everything around began to crack. She got scared and rushed to him. She approached him and immediately understood. He needed help, so she tried to assist. Tried to attack her in vain, but the monster is already here. The monster pushed her away with his muscles. She flew back and he stood across the path, not letting her pass. All the Minotaur's attacks were fierce. She, with surprise on her face, wondered how much the dance of the wind had made him stronger. His strength, could he still be standing? How did he manage to hold onto his own? Finding herself at his feet, she remembered his words and jumped. She moved towards the monster and thought, this guy believed in her and in her strength. Focused with a stone expression on her face, she struck. She plunged her daggers into the attack and indeed managed to inflict damage. From the deep wound, the monster felt terrible pain. With a single sweep of his hand, he threw it away as if with one motion he threw it back at her. Pushing his hand away, he lunged at him again with a weapon. It seemed to him that he was already at the limit. Barely raising the axe for another strike, but because of the wounds that already covered him, he suddenly stopped and fell to the ground. She instantly became confused. He refused, and they asked him directly whether the Minotaur had run out of strength. Strength left her. She sighed with relief when she realized what had happened. Her face blossomed with a joyful smile, and she said it worked. They won, survived the fight with the Minotaur, and even he was exhausted after that clash. He lowered his sword, blood slowly dripping down his hands. She noticed it. Her face filled with anxiety and loudly asked, "Is this the opposite effect? Now she will heal him." MC with a calm smile called her and asked if she was okay. Okay, she agreed, rushed sharply to his backpack and said he just needed to sit down. Sit down, I'll get you a potion, she said. He thanked her and lay down. He fell to the ground and joyfully said that their plan still worked. He thought that such unbearable fatigue had fallen upon him, as if he had never had a fourth level of endurance recovery. Ari turned around, called him, and shouted that she would carry everything she could find. She handed him a healing potion and asked him to drink. He agreed and sincerely thanked her. She quietly crept up from behind and whispered that the wounds now need to be smeared with healing ointment, so he should take off his cloak. Taking off the cloak, she tried to unfasten it but couldn't. I didn't expect it to be so heavy, he exclaimed loudly. What kind of cape is this? Even armor would be lighter. Is it made of iron? They asked, but he denied it and explained. The thing is made of heavy silver, the kind that falls from a rare monster. Silver plate. Its silver resists all magical attacks, weighs several times more than any other metal, and it cannot be processed at all. That's why it's not an item but a complete disappointment. With a confused face, she uncorked a jar of ointment and asked, well, somehow he sewed this cloak, right? Ro nodded and said that he melted it into plates, placed them on a wooden base, and hammered them out. He simply transforms things into the needed shape. She, surprised, asked why if there are other types of armor, and he just smiled and replied that weight hardly bothers him. He decided it would be funnier that way. She froze in shock and he burst out laughing. She said that silver plates usually settled on the 13th floor, that's where new travelers were sent, and asked, so that's why they started calling him Floor Devourer. He no longer remembered this and said that the fact that the Adventurers Guild gave him the task to exterminate the owlbear pushed him to move down to the 13th floor. Recalling the past, he decided, the owlbear is a floor boss that roams the dungeon corridors. The dungeon devoured the lives of many adventurers who had just set out on their path. Although it was killed, it respawned in half a month. When he himself was an ordinary average guy, tirelessly tracking the owlbear, 3 years passed, and finally he found the respawn point. Blocking one of the main arteries, he redirected the flow of magical elements and removed the monster forever. So the 13th floor, feared as the floor of death, became accessible to novice adventurers. She suddenly became surprised, remembering what had happened earlier, and asked if he had a bad reputation in the bar. He said with a light, almost cheeky smile that while following the owlbear, he accidentally came across silver discs and also started hunting them, so it is understandable why they decided he had appropriated them. He declared grimly that all the floors belonged only to him. She, blinking confusedly, asked, what about telling all the others, the small ones? Minotaur lunged to throw him back, but in vain. He was pinned down, held by the weight of his own body. He threw off his cloak and grabbed a sword, and even one of his friends once scolded him for such an idea. Finally, he found something to say. Such an opportunity had arisen for the first time. What she heard embarrassed her. Bird smiled and said that he was stranger than she could have imagined. Measured, the main character, smiled and asked him. She asked if all travelers are like that. Didn't she think so too? She laughed and said, that's how it is. So, having together defeated the Minotaur, they began to make peace with. Well, that conversation, which started by itself, quickly died out. Ari caught the sound and instantly said, "This is the bell of the time of fear and wish fulfillment, time to pack up camp, ring." The chime echoed from the same place where the Minotaur had just appeared. She used auxiliary air magic, the kind that allowed hearing sounds from a certain location. She noticed the monster hovering overhead and loudly shouted at it, calling it a stone gargoyle. Consider, after all, their bodies are made of solid stone. Physical blows with physical force against them are almost powerless. He plunged his sword into the ground and loudly shouted that he would take the monster's attack on his sword end. She had to brace against his back. They withstood the blow, and he decided that the two-handed sword had cracked. If that blow had hit the body, there would be nothing left to hide. The monster grabbed him by the back. She swung the dagger, suddenly stopped when a ringing sound pierced the silence. She sharply turned around. He turned around and decided that with a single gargoyle they would barely manage. If another one appeared, there would be no time left to cast the spell. He loudly called him and warned he should be careful. Caution, the monster, rushing at a mad speed, crashed right into her. With the same madly fast strike, he threw her several meters to the side. Stepping aside, MC began to worry because about this. He shouted loudly and sharply to her. He shouted sharply, rushed forward, and asked if she was okay. He was silent, tightly gripped the sword in his hand. Barely with a jerk, he pulls her inside. Pull him out from under the ground and carry him through the gargoyle. Push him aside, he turned sharply. His face tense. He was thinking about how to get Burry out of there as soon as possible. Maybe the escaped gargoyle can return. She called him and said that the wishing Furan. Bells rang again. There were many bells on the right and left. On both sides he understood this and said that she needs to hide in the cave, and suddenly he found himself right in front of her. She stood at the entrance to the cave and decisively said that they needed to summon wind dance on his hands. Otherwise, it was impossible. She would have to incessantly whisper the spell so that it would not weaken. He, gritting his teeth, swallowed the tension. The real tragedy was unfolding right now. 2 days had already passed since the collapse. Yuika and the rest had been searching for their missing comrades all this time. They could barely stand on their feet, and their anxiety only grew, and the group was led by Nuku, the master of the gift of recognition. Focused, with a tense face, he thought, this gift finds monsters by the magical streams coming from them. This gift was not suitable for finding lost friends. Behind him spread icy energy and a mocking aura. 2 days in a row, not a single clue, and the Black Princess with the respected Mazakin were already barely restraining their patience. How could he admit to them that his gift itself did not hunt people at the crossroads? He suggested going to the right because he thought, if this continued, exhaustion and hunger would kill them and they would eventually become completely powerless. He sighed heavily and quietly whispered that they needed to find the luggage as soon as possible. Ivka heard this and asked if he himself, the poor fellow, was okay. There was nothing to worry about. If she really understood everything correctly, he rejected everything and said that even if they found the luggage, without Sherpa himself they would not get to the surface, and of course, he wanted him to be alive and well. Ozzy laughed and, as if in passing, asked if they would push the girl into the same. Against the backdrop of Nuku, he tensed even more. Because of this, he sharply objected and said that he and Bari had fought side by side for so many years. Of course, he only wanted her to be okay too. They moved forward and he froze in place and thought it would have been better not to say anything. Fear pierced him like lightning as soon as Litz touched his shoulder. He turned around and that slight embarrassed expression did not leave his face. He was still trying to understand what was wrong with this monster. Could it be that she really decided to cheer him up and called to ask why he was stuck there? They were supposed to show him the way. He nodded and firmly replied, ahead monsters about 3. Cerberus appeared. He wanted to warn them about this, and Iveka called the King of the Dead in a serious voice and gave the order. He commanded them to attack and use Swamp of Duh, pushing them straight into the attack. And he wove a spell of darkness and apologized. And he said, there is only one 3-headed Cerberus. He said sadly that he usually does not make such a mistake. Come on. The smart ones patted him on the head and she exclaimed, surprised and loudly. He had no right to attack at all. What was he hoping for? Mazuakin said that the monster simply decided to empathize. She was with their friend. She thought about it, apologized, and said that she had been too harsh with him. He quietly said that he also admitted his guilt and asked Nuku not to worry. A tear rolled down her cheek, and she decided that this monster understands all the subtleties of human relationships. She walked forward with a sad face and mentally knew they still had to go through that feeling of hopelessness. They had passed through so many labyrinths that she could no longer count and had never in her life felt a search that radiated such despair. She and Bari had been friends for so many years, and she was always nearby like a younger sister who does not leave the older one for a step. Of course, she wants everything to be fine with her. But they, like travelers, had to be ready that they could lose each other at any moment. They met Darling about 2 weeks ago and became lovers only 10 days ago. Such a short time is not enough to settle into irreversible love and truly weave a person into your life. She had not yet managed to become attached to him and had not given him her heart, so everything would have been fine with him, even if he were gone. It disappeared. Nuku called the Black Princess and said that there were plenty of monsters ahead. It already reminded her too much of a carnival. A barely noticeable surprise flashed in her voice. Eyes, is there a carnival in this fragment? She noticed this and was surprised, then, a little embarrassed, asked. Look, if they were really there. She and Mazukin rushed forward. Her heart was pounding, and it seemed to her she was afraid to find out the truth. Perhaps it was the smell of a person that attracted all these monsters there. Corpses they ran into crowned lizard folk. With a wary look, she pondered the coming. The adventure in Sherpa, left without a group, had no chance of survival. He asked the princess. Take cover and cast the Moonblade spell. She instantly burst into tears as soon as it dawned on her. And in her thoughts she trembled. As soon as her beloved dies, she wouldn't have endured this, no way. He warned the princess once again that she should. She needs to go left and unleash the unstoppable soul-killing spell. She darted aside and snatched. She drew her sword and thought, she has enough thinking about his death. She rolled back. As she moved forward, she couldn't get rid of the thought, he is a true first-class Sherpa. So he will have to figure out how to do it, spoil it so it becomes stale. Alive, a horned monster with floppy ears blocked her way and immediately lunged an attack with its tongue. Pausing for a moment, she used her skill and dashed faster, clenching her teeth from tension. She decided that's exactly why the tears must stop. She so wanted to believe that he was alive. She can hit a monster standing behind her with her magic. She kept running forward, using gift. Phantom Needle ended up on the bighorn monster. He jumped to the ground and said, my name is Nekusak. And that he has to fight the rest of the monsters. She kept running and thought that she sincerely wanted to meet him again. She saw that MC was standing near the cage. The cave he dug was in terrible condition, and then SH. He froze with fear and only then called him. Yuka carefully examined him and could not understand what is so special about this worthless sword. It seemed it was not even a sword. The leather cloak was all covered in soot and torn. It still showed traces of fire, scars from lightning, and cold traces of ice. What kind of monsters did he have to survive? An empty, invisible gaze. His clothes were soaked with blood. It had already darkened to a deep crimson. He was barely conscious. He was still standing. She started crying and thought that they had known each other for a very short time, so she would. Could this be normal even if she never saw him again? Some nonsense. No matter how much time passed since their meeting, even those 10 days they spent as lovers. So much had happened between them that it was unimaginable. She approached him, called him darling, and thought that her heart already belonged to him. She hugged him tightly, called him again, and whispered that it was her, the one he no longer had to fight. He barely uttered her name and said that Bari was in this cave. She is She has a fracture and her magical powers are exhausted. She needs immediate treatment. Mazukin flew into the cave, called her, and firmly said that there were no more monsters. They need to stop resorting to magic. She lay with her eyes closed and called him Dad. Nuku jumped out to them and he exclaimed that they needed first aid. Eureka was confused, called Litz, and ordered them to guard the perimeter. And he asked if there was anything to stop the bleeding. Ro closed his eyes and thought, everyone survived. Survived? She, with tears in her eyes, pressed a cloth to his face and asked, let them treat the wounds and all return to the surface together. All right, 2 days have passed since Twilight Sword returned to the surface. The hospital for heroes stands right next to the entrance to the labyrinth. He was placed in a small ward for especially important patients on the very top floor. He sighed heavily, tensed his face, and thought, terribly grateful, but this luxury is already a nightmare come true. There was a bathtub with undiluted magical elixirs, piles of hemostatic mixtures, and so much elite healing magic as if they were going to raise the dead. Earlier he came to the doctor and calmly said that he was already completely healthy and wanted to be discharged, adjusted his glasses, refused an additional examination, and then declared, Twilight Sword ordered him to heal. He thought, if Yueka comes tomorrow, he will ask her to help so that not even a scratch remains. He was here to help with the dispatch. He heard a knock on the door and decided that it was the doctor. He was the one who allowed her to enter. She opened the door. He approached Darling and with hope in his voice said that she had come to visit him. Can she come in? He called her and replied that there was no need to even ask. He was surprised that she wore a snow-colored dress, and he said so. She admitted that she usually does not wear such things. Bari chose it for formal dinners, but such places are simply not for her. Today she wore it for the first time. For the first time, how does he like it? He smiled and said. Hearing that she was irresistibly attractive, she blossomed with joy. She settled down next to him and the protagonist confessed, during the last descent she hardly rested. Did she at least get some sleep when they returned? She smiled and replied that she just lay down for a minute. And she woke up only after a day and a half. At lunch she went to visit Bari and he, a little worried, said that she seemed to have been sent to a hospital that treats fractures. How is she? Is she okay? Smiling, she assured that she was not worried at all, but Mazakun was too tense. She told her how he did not panic and ordered to hide in that cave. She was incredibly grateful to him. He saved her life. As she understood, she wanted to apologize for her Ovdiaka. Will he accept the apology? He agreed and she. It even pleased her, but her thoughts returned again to something else. She turned away and whispered something barely audible. He noticed it and called her by name. She turned to him and he asked, "What's wrong with you?" She trembled so much with excitement that she finally dared to ask, was she? She could get in there and he still didn't understand why. She still agreed, and after that she lay down next to him on the bed and covered herself with a blanket. He looked at her and thought that it was. If it were an expensive dress, it would definitely have wrinkled. Eureka asked embarrassedly, by the way, how did he feel? It seemed to him that she smelled of flowers. He also got nervous and stammering said that he felt on top of the world and was ready to defeat even the Minotaur with his bare hands. So he wants to be discharged already tomorrow, and noticed how she lowered her head and called him by name. She confessed that she had just become an adventuress and for the first time felt fear on her own skin. After that collapse that tore them apart, and until the very moment when they finally met again. Her heart tightened for a second from paralyzing horror. Her head swarmed with excuses for leaving them one after another. It hurt so much that she wanted to tear out her own heart just to finally feel the emptiness. She only glanced at the passage teeming with monsters, and one thought instantly flashed in her mind. How exactly she would find their bodies. Her beloved believed in her, never doubted for a moment, but even she thought. She imagined what she would do if not a single living soul remained, and she was supposed to believe in him more than anyone. She apologized, and he thought she was one of those who hold to their principles and the law. The last one, that is why her spirit is so strong, pure, like the night sky. He embraced her and said he would not recognize a love that believes blindly. She knows how to act even when her mind is in complete chaos, and turn any situation to her advantage. This is one of her wonderful traits. Mind says one thing, the heart's desire another. He believed in her and knows she believed in him too. He's still very good, and he loves her just like that. Touch her, she leaned forward. He approached him, whispered darling, and kissed him. He still touched lips a little, and he was. Inside him there was a slight tremble. He thought everything was already hopelessly ruined. He did not know at all how to relieve that tension and saw nothing. Any buttons or knots, maybe they were just hidden under. Under Yuika's ruffles, she touched his lips and whispered what he said. He said that in such moments, it's normal to have to pretend to be. Like a mischievous kitten, she began rubbing her head against his face. He truly thought that she was like a kitten. His face flushed red with shame. She addressed him as darling and said that was exactly why she asked him to be gentle with her. She frowned and, like a cat, began to imitate his behavior, the thought running through her mind, what if? I thought maybe she should ask Tay about this. Once, or rather, the next morning they woke up in bed. MC greeted her good morning with a smile, and she was so flustered that she replied in the same tone and with the same smile. Then they walked down the street and she, blushing, asked, could it have been just pretending to be a kitten? There really was no need. Why didn't he tell her about it yesterday? He was a bit embarrassed, apologized, and sincerely said that she tried so hard. And it was so sweet. He didn't finish speaking. She suddenly squeezed his hand tightly and looked displeased. He loudly declared that everything was not like that at all. He said he couldn't take off her dress, so they were quits. She was on the verge of tears from shame, and also loudly said that his embarrassment was nowhere near hers. He felt a threat in her gaze, muttered awkwardly, and said that no one would feel worse from this because when two share something shameful between themselves, their relationship only grows stronger. She calmed down a bit and, smiling slightly, said that now it was his turn to tell her something just as embarrassing about himself. Ivka was sure yesterday she behaved that way not just for nothing, the dress she usually didn't wear, the perfume, and the fact that they slept in the same bed. During the first and second descents, they miraculously survived, however. No one could guarantee that their next, third descent would go smoothly. She didn't want her feelings for her beloved person to be reduced to mere pity. It's a pity when they were finally found, she sighed with relief. but then she saw it was such an unbreakable adventure. He hid the spirit of a traveler within himself and suddenly fell in love again, as if for the first time. Darling has a family for whom he is ready to do anything, and she must destroy the dungeons. They cannot sacrifice what is most precious to them for love, but she has not yet let go of that hand. Rose whispered around the corner the house of relatives who take care of Marie. Ivica was about to speak but managed to say only, "S." Say something, but she, seeing her cry, ran up to her and shouted loudly. She called her sister and with a trembling voice asked, "Is this the picture book you gave her? What happened?" He to him, with a tearful expression on her face, she exclaimed, and immediately began to beg for forgiveness. She pressed her to herself and whispered that it was not necessary, there was nothing to apologize for, it was not her fault. Icha and Colin left the house and immediately started to mock. They rushed at her, but as soon as they noticed him, they instantly retreated and ran back. He looked at them and her face showed too obvious displeasure. He asked, not hiding his surprise, "Are these the two who did that?" Marie continued, "Crow." She cried, agreed, and said that she sat in the corner to read, but then her book was taken away. Morale opened the door. "So you decided to come back?" he asked, and surprise rang in his voice. She exclaimed. She stretched out her hand and said, "I have no idea anymore what all this fuss is about. It's foolish to take children's words at face value. Who knows what really happened there? Maybe he just wanted to quarrel with her." He pulled coins from the bag, sharply denied everything, and declared that everyone saw how her children teased his crying sister. He handed over the money and asked her to ask them not to do that anymore. He snorted and slammed the door right in his face. She was dissatisfied, about to ask something, but he immediately cut her off. They would talk about it as soon as they returned. He greeted Marie and, barely smiling, said that it was time for them to go home. When they returned home, Yuka loudly called Darling, and after all, he said it was not worth giving up so quickly, so why did he just let them go? He should have demanded compensation. Sensation, he said that the pages were dirty and asked her to calm down, so for now. He carefully wiped the cover, then took it to the master, let him glue it. She blossomed with happiness, wiping tears from her eyes, and asked, "Will this really help?" "Helps." The protagonist agreed and said that they would come for it tomorrow. She asked if he always asked those people to look after her, and he nodded, explaining, "Muro is my only relative." She, with hope in her voice, asked if the money he paid would be enough for kindergarten. "That's definitely better for her, right?" "Right," he said sadly, that in their city, unfortunately, there was nothing like that. He hugged his sister and whispered that children without families are doomed. Either they die of hunger or end up on the black market. He agreed. They did not. There was no special warmth between them, but if something did happen, at least she would be safe. Life, she nodded under the anxious face and wanted to object, but was struck with horror. The deeper the group descended, the deeper she descended. The more danger lurked for Sherpa, the greater his risk, and the lives of Darling and Marie hung by a thread, and the threat was not from somewhere else, but from herself. The host called her with a small smile and said that she did not need to worry about it. He had already made his choice. The decision was made only after careful risk assessment, and they pay him so much that probably everything won't be ruined. She said they are truly close, not just as a traveler and a Sherpa. He did not manage to finish speaking because he refused and firmly stated that this was a matter only for his family. She was shocked that she thought that she was pushed away, or rather, she was hinted at where her place was so that she would not take responsibility. He smiled and quietly said that, to be honest, he plans to move to a big city so that Mari can go to school. He is at school, so he will gradually save money, and if he puts effort into it, he will receive the reward given to him for the next disagreement. His disagreement, and he will get exactly as much as needed, and then she will finally be able to live without worries. Yuka said firmly, "If money is the reason." He immediately felt the expression on his face. Aggression and this thought, they definitely meet. Dating does not mean that you can dump everything on the other person. He does not need alms, and he will not accept them. A quiet smile on his lips told her this without any words. He decides for himself what to do, apparently wears this principle as a motto. He takes responsibility for his sister, and from then on they will start a new life. But in that future which Darling so longs for, she is not there. Last night they were consumed by burning feelings. Their love is obvious, but for him it is still a matter of his family, so he does not consider her close and would not trust her with family problems. She loves him painfully, but for him she still remains a stranger. She stubbornly looks at him and thinks he will not live to see this. She began to take off her gloves and quietly said that she believes that he is guided by the best intentions, but his words struck her to the core. Ro was confused and shouted her name. She threw the gloves on the table and with great embarrassment exclaimed that He will have to take her as his wife. This confused him even more, and she, with a determined expression on her face, she thought, finally the problems of her favorites will disappear. Next morning he found himself tied up in the Sherpa Guild and did not understand at all what was happening there. The department employees tensed their muscles in front of him and said decisively, "The report on the underground descent into the dungeon is delayed. He will not go until he writes it." He took it upon himself and wrote. Meanwhile, they started dancing, and he apologized and promised that everything would be done by morning. Their sudden appearance was so unexpected. He was pulled out of his home, so he didn't even have time to prepare breakfast for Marie. Bunji also tensed his muscles and shouted that there was nothing to worry about here and showed with his hand. He sharply pointed to the side and ordered him to look here, Sherpas. He brought her a bunch of different dishes and invited her to eat. One of them cheerfully exclaimed, "Here are candies and juice, take as much as you want, there are plenty here," and he had already brought his sister with him. Though she visited the Sherpa Guild more than once and knew that these big men were actually kind. The guild leader also approached and said they needed to stop and even wanted to take care of her. Gima, with obvious displeasure, replied, they should calm down, otherwise they would actually lose control. Fighting, she asked the employee to close the door, called him over, and said that these guides contain everything. He enthusiastically talked about the labyrinths of the Tyro's dungeon and said that they finally filled in the gaps on the maps. He agreed to tell her everything that happened in the dungeon right closer to noon, right in the very heart of the city, in the temple of the goddess Galatica. Ari exited the building with a joyful smile and thought that she had finally managed to level up and even get a new ability. I need to check the princess's report. She froze as if she had lost her breath the moment she noticed the protagonist walking down the road. Road instinctively hid behind a flower bed. She sharply looked back and decided, the man walking ahead is the head of the Advent Travelers Guild. She was sure his name is Joe, but who is that woman? Why are they walking with her? Bad feeling squeezed her heart, so she decided to follow them. She set off after them and reached the building they had entered. She activated the gift of Furen consciousness. Suddenly she decided it was here that she received the invitation from the Tyro City Hall. Dinner at a first-class restaurant. She attached a magical mark to his back. Note, this gift allows hearing sounds within the radius of the same mark on which the gift's device is attached. She suddenly heard a restaurant worker say that they needed to go to. They are going to a private room on the second floor. Their partner will be here any moment. After that, she suddenly heard a knock on the door and someone was apologizing to Baramun for being late. She caught Jim's words, updating the map will take time. Bari immediately decided she is from Sherpa Guild. It turned out to be the voice of a woman who had just passed by. The mayor announced that it turned out they had broken the diving record again. She closed her eyes and thought that she needed to gather herself and listen to the conversation. The mayor added that they could sit down. There was plenty of food, so no one was shy. After all, he already knows about Twilight's sword down to the smallest details, right? Then he will finally be able to answer his question. She looked with a serious expression. Why could such an important man secretly obtain? Find out about their team. A bad feeling would not let her rest. He asked with a sparkle in his eyes to tell about the gift of the Phantom Needle. How many creatures can this technique subdue? MC shrugged and said he did not know for sure, somewhere around 10, but he could be wrong. She smiled upon hearing this and thought that he had just lied, although in reality there were many more.